The moment the entire town fell silent, Cora Bennett knew her worst nightmare had come true. Mrs. Halstead's voice cut through the church social like a blade. A girl with a child and no husband doesn't belong here. But before Cora could run, before she could grab her son and disappear like she'd done in 3 towns before, a tall cowboy stepped forward and said words that would change everything. If you want to know how a woman nobody wanted became the heart of a family built on courage, stay until the end. And comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The Woman Who Stayed in the Shadows. The gunshot cracked across Silverside's town square like thunder splitting a summer sky, and Cora Bennett's entire world contracted to the small, warm body pressed against her chest. "Mama?" 4-year-old Evan's voice trembled against her collarbone, his small fingers tangling in the worn fabric of her dress. "Mama? What was that?" "Shh, baby, shh." Cora's heart hammered so violently she was certain everyone within 10 feet could hear it. Her arms tightened around Evan as she pressed them both deeper into the narrow gap between the general store and the boarding house, where shadows gathered thick as guilt and just as heavy. Around them, Silverside's Founders' Day festival continued its raucous celebration. Someone shouted, "Just a cowpoke celebrating, no harm done." Laughter rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. A fiddle resumed its frantic tune, and boots began stomping the packed earth again, raising dust that caught the late afternoon light in golden swirls. But Cora couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The gunshot had transported her back to that night in Stillwater, the night Jim Bradshaw had kicked in her boarding house door, drunk and angry, demanding to know why she'd refused his generous offer of employment at the saloon. The night she'd grabbed Evan and run with nothing but the clothes on their backs and $7 sewn into her petticoat. "Mama, you're squeezing too tight." Evan squirmed in her grip, and Cora realized her fingers were digging into his small shoulders. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm sorry." She forced herself to loosen her hold, though every instinct screamed at her to grab him and run. Again, always running, always one step ahead of whispers and judgment and men who thought a woman alone was a woman available. They'd been in Silverside for 3 weeks, longer than Cora had stayed anywhere since leaving Kansas City nearly 2 years ago. Mrs. Fletcher, who ran the boarding house, had taken pity on them. Or maybe she'd just needed help with the cooking and cleaning badly enough to overlook Cora's obvious sin, a child without a wedding ring to explain him. "Can we get candy now?" Evan's resilience never ceased to amaze her. The fear in his voice had already disappeared, replaced by the hopeful wheedling of a little boy at a festival. "You said maybe, Mama. You said if we had extra pennies." "I know what I said." Cora smoothed his dark hair, so like her own, and tried to gather the courage to step back into the crowd. But the thought of all those eyes judging, calculating, whispering, made her stomach clench. She knew what they saw when they looked at her. A fallen woman. A girl who'd made a mistake and refused to hide the evidence. At 22, Cora had learned that society had no mercy for women like her, no matter how they'd come to their circumstances. It didn't matter that she'd been 17 and desperately in love. It didn't matter that Robert Cunningham had promised her everything, marriage, a home, a family, and delivered nothing but lies and abandonment. "Mama?" Evan pulled back to look at her face, his brown eyes, Robert's eyes, though Cora tried never to think of that, wide with concern. "Are you sad again?" The question pierced her heart. 4 years old, and he already recognized the weight she carried, the shadows that never quite left her face. "No, baby, Mama's fine. I'm just—" She stopped because she'd promised herself she would never lie to him. He deserved that much honesty in a world that had given him so little. "I'm just being careful." "Because of the bad men?" Cora's throat tightened. She'd tried so hard to shelter him from the worst of their struggles, but children saw everything. They absorbed fear like roots absorbing rain, drawing it deep into themselves where it could twist and warp their view of the world. "There are no bad men here," she said, praying it was true. "This is a nice town. Mrs. Fletcher is kind to us, isn't she?" Evan nodded, but his expression remained solemn. Too solemn for a child who should be running wild at a festival, his pockets full of penny candy and his face sticky with lemonade. "Tell you what," Cora said, making a decision that felt both reckless and necessary. "Let's go find those candies, but we stay together, And if Mama says it's time to go, we go. Deal? Deal! Evan's face transformed with joy so pure it made Cora's chest ache. This was what she fought for, what kept her moving when exhaustion pulled at her bones like hands dragging her underwater. These moments of childhood happiness, stolen from a world that wanted to punish them both for her mistakes. She straightened her dress. The blue calico she'd sewn herself from fabric Mrs. Fletcher had given her in lieu of 2 weeks' wages, and stepped toward the edge of the alley. The afternoon sun hit her full in the face, and she squinted against its brightness, against the exposure of leaving the shadows. The town square bustled with activity. Long tables groaned under pies and cakes and roasted meats. Children chased each other around the gazebo where the fiddle player sawed away at the Irish washerwoman. Men clustered in groups, talking horses and cattle and the railroad that was supposedly coming through next year. Women stood in tight circles, their heads bent together in conversation that Cora knew, with bitter certainty, often involved speculation about people like her. "Stay close," she murmured to Evan, taking his hand. They'd made it perhaps 10 feet into the crowd when Mrs. Halstead materialized in front of them, like divine judgment made flesh. Delilah Halstead was 50 if she was a day, with a spine like an iron rod, and a face that suggested she'd never had an impure thought in her life, and was deeply suspicious of anyone who had. Her husband owned the bank, her father had founded half the town, and she ran the ladies' social committee with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. "Miss Bennet?" The title was weighted with meaning, not Mrs., not respectable, just Miss with all its implications. "Mrs. Halstead." Cora's voice came out steadier than she'd expected. She felt Evan press against her skirts, instinctively seeking shelter. "I don't believe I've seen you at our Sunday services." Mrs. Halstead's eyes, pale blue and cold as winter ice, swept over Cora from head to toe, cataloging every mended seam, every sign of poverty and shame. "I've been working, ma'am. Mrs. Fletcher needs help serving breakfast to the boarders on Sunday mornings." This was true, though Cora knew it was also an excuse. She couldn't bear to sit in that church, feeling the eyes on her back, the whispers that followed her down the aisle like ghosts. "How convenient." Mrs. Halstead's lips thinned. "Though I would think a woman in your situation would be more concerned with her immortal soul." The words struck like a slap, and Cora felt blood rush to her cheeks. But before she could formulate a response, before she could grab Evan and retreat to the safety of their small room at the boarding house, a deep voice spoke from behind her. "Mrs. Halstead, always a pleasure." Cora turned to find a man standing just over her shoulder, close enough that she could smell leather and sage and something else, something clean, like wind over open prairie. He was tall, taller than most men she'd known, with broad shoulders and work-roughened hands. His face was weathered in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors, but his eyes were kind, startlingly kind, the color of honey in sunlight. Those eyes met hers for a brief moment, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or recognition of a fellow soul who knew what it meant to be judged. Then he turned his attention to Mrs. Halstead, and his expression shifted to something polite but firm. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure of meeting your companion." Mrs. Halstead's face pinched like she'd bitten into a lemon. "This is Miss Bennet. She works for Ida Fletcher at the boarding house." "Pleasure, Miss Bennet." The man touched the brim of his hat. "Colt Avery. I'm new to town myself, just took up a section of land west of here, planning to build it into a proper ranch." Cora managed a nod, too startled to speak. Men didn't usually acknowledge her in public, not kindly. They either looked through her as if she were invisible or looked at her in ways that made her skin crawl. "And who's this young man?" Colt Avery crouched down, bringing himself to Evan's level. "You must be about the bravest fellow at this festival." Evan, who'd been hiding behind Cora's skirts, peeked out cautiously. "Why?" "Because you're standing right here with all this noise and commotion, and you haven't run off scared yet. Takes courage for a man to stand his ground." Despite herself, Cora felt her lips twitch toward a smile. Evan straightened slightly, his chest puffing out with pride. "I'm 4, he announced, "and I'm not scared of anything." 4? Well, that's practically grown. When I was 4, I was scared of chickens. "Chickens?" Evan giggled, a sound like water over stones, pure and clear. That's silly. You'd think so, wouldn't you? But there was this one rooster at my uncle's farm, mean as a snake, chased me clear across the yard every morning. Colt Avery's eyes crinkled at the corners. Your mama know you're so brave. She knows. Evan glanced up at Cora with such absolute trust that she felt tears prick at her eyes. Mama says I'm her brave boy. Sounds like your mama's a smart lady. Mrs. Halstead made a noise somewhere between a cough and a snort. Mr. Avery, I hardly think... We were just heading to look at the candies, Colt continued, as if the older woman hadn't spoken. He straightened, his gaze returning to Cora. If you'd permit me, Miss Bennett, I'd be honored to escort you and your son. Being new to town, I could use the company, and I hear the licorice from the general store is particularly fine. Cora stared at him, searching for the catch, the angle, the ulterior motive, but all she saw in his face was genuine warmth, and underneath that, a kind of quiet determination that suggested he knew exactly what he was doing and why. Her voice faltered. She couldn't remember the last time someone had offered her kindness in public, where others could see, where it mattered. Please, Mama? Evan tugged at her hand. The man likes licorice, Mrs. Halstead's expression had gone from sour to thunderous. Mr. Avery, I don't know what they do where you come from, but in Silverside, we have standards. And I'm sure those standards include treating all of God's children with respect and compassion, Colt said mildly. My mother always said that was the whole point of going to church, learning how to be kinder. She'd be disappointed if I forgot that lesson now. The older woman's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Then she drew herself up to her full height, which was still several inches shorter than Colt Avery, and sniffed. I'll be speaking to my husband about this. Good day. She swept away, her back rigid with disapproval, and Cora found herself alone with this strange cowboy who just publicly defended her against the most powerful woman in town. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Mrs. Halstead, she runs things here. She could make your life difficult. Colt shrugged, apparently unconcerned. I've dealt with difficult before, and I don't much care for people who kick folks when they're down. His eyes met hers again, warm and steady. Seemed like you could use a friend. Cora wanted to tell him she didn't need friends, didn't need anyone, that she and Evan were fine on their own, but the words stuck in her throat because they were lies, and she'd promised Evan she wouldn't lie. We were going to get candy, she said instead, her voice barely above a whisper. Then let's get candy. Colt offered his arm in a gesture so natural, so easy, that for a moment Cora forgot she was supposed to be invisible. She looked down at Evan, who was practically vibrating with excitement, and then at the arm extended toward her. It was just a walk across the town square, just a few minutes in the company of a kind stranger. What harm could it do? Everything, whispered the part of her that had learned to survive by staying hidden. This is how it starts. This is how you get hurt again. But there was another voice, too, quieter but insistent. The voice that remembered being 17 and brave, before the world had taught her to be afraid. The voice that wanted Evan to see his mother as more than a shadow, more than a cautious ghost haunting the edges of life. She placed her hand lightly on Colt Avery's arm. His smile was like sunrise, slow and warm and full of promise. Come on, partner, he said to Evan. Let's go see about that licorice. They moved through the crowd together, and Cora felt the stares like pinpricks against her skin. But Colt Avery walked steadily, his stride unhurried, as if escorting her and her son through the Founders' Day festival was the most natural thing in the world. The candy stand was run by Mr. Chen, who operated a small shop on the east side of town. He'd always been kind to Cora, never asking questions, sometimes slipping Evan an extra peppermint when he thought no one was looking. Miss Bennett! Mr. Chen's face creased into a genuine smile. And young Evan, come to see the sweets. Yes, sir. Evan pressed his face against the glass display, his breath fogging the surface as he examined the colorful array of candies. Mr. Chen, this is Colt Avery, Cora said, finding her voice. He's new to the area. Welcome, welcome. Mr. Chen bobbed his head. Always good to see new faces. You have a sweet tooth, Mr. Avery? I've been known to indulge, Colt said. Though I was hoping you might recommend something. I promised this young man we'd find the best candy at the festival. Evan looked up at him with something approaching worship, and Cora felt her heart twist. He'd never known a father, never had a man in his life who spoke to him with kindness and respect. The lack of it had hollowed out a place inside her son that she couldn't fill, no matter how hard she tried. The lemon drops are very popular, Mr. Chen said, pointing to a jar of bright yellow candies. And the peppermints, of course, but for a special occasion, he reached under the counter and produced a small box. Chocolates, fresh this week from Denver. Evan's eyes went round as saucers. Chocolate was a luxury far beyond their reach, something Cora occasionally glimpsed in shop windows but never dared to purchase. We'll take a half-pound of the licorice, Colt said, pulling coins from his pocket. A quarter-pound of lemon drops, and he glanced down at Evan. How about we let this young man pick out one piece of chocolate, anyone he wants? Mr. Avery, that's too generous, Cora began, but Colt shook his head. It's a festival, he said simply, and I just got paid for my first week of work at the Rocking M Ranch. A man ought to celebrate good fortune with friends. Friends. The word hung in the air between them, fragile and strange. Mr. Chen opened the chocolate box, and Evan approached it with the reverence usually reserved for church. His small finger hovered over the selections, weighing his choice with the seriousness of a judge delivering a verdict. That one, he finally pronounced, pointing to a chocolate with a swirl of caramel on top. Excellent choice. Mr. Chen carefully wrapped it in waxed paper and handed it to Evan, who clutched it like treasure. While Colt completed the purchase, Cora studied him from the corner of her eye. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, but there was something more there too, something watchful in the way his gaze periodically swept the crowd, as if checking for danger. A soldier's habit, maybe, or a lawman's, or maybe just the habit of someone who'd learned that the world could turn dangerous in a heartbeat. Here. Colt handed her the bag of licorice and lemon drops. Something to enjoy later. I can't accept. Sure you can. It's a gift, Miss Bennett. No strings, no expectations, just one new friend to another. He crouched down beside Evan again. You gonna eat that chocolate now, or save it for later? Evan looked at the wrapped chocolate, then up at his mother. Can I save it, Mama? To make it last longer? Cora's throat tightened. He was so young, but already he understood scarcity, the need to make precious things last because you never knew when you'd have them again. You can save it, baby. Smart thinking, Colt approved. Best things in life are worth savoring. They moved away from the candy stand, and Cora expected Colt to make his excuses and leave. She'd gotten used to brief kindnesses, small gestures that made people feel good about themselves without requiring any real commitment or cost. But Colt didn't leave. Instead, he walked with them toward the far edge of the square, where the crowd thinned and the noise dropped to a manageable level. He found a bench beneath an old oak tree and gestured for Cora to sit. You looked like you could use a break from the crowd, he said. Cora sank onto the bench, grateful beyond words. Her feet ached. She'd been up since dawn, helping Mrs. Fletcher prepare breakfast for the boarders, and the tension of moving through the festival had left her exhausted. Evan immediately climbed onto the bench beside her, unwrapping his chocolate with the careful precision of a surgeon. So, Colt said, leaning against the oak tree with his arms crossed. How long have you been in Silverside? 3 weeks. Cora smoothed her skirt, a nervous habit. We came from Stillwater before that. That's quite a ways. You have family here? She shook her head. No family, just looking for a fresh start. Colt nodded slowly, and something in his expression told her he understood exactly what kind of fresh start she meant, the kind where you left your past behind and prayed it didn't follow you. Fresh starts are good, he said. I'm after one myself, actually. Spent the last 8 years working other men's ranches, saving every penny. Finally got enough to buy my own land. It's not much yet, just open prairie and a creek. But it's mine. There was pride in his voice and something else. Determination, the same quality Cora heard in her own voice when she talked about making a better life for Evan. That sounds wonderful, she said, and meant it. She'd stopped dreaming of permanence, of belonging somewhere, but she could still appreciate it in others. It will be, once I build it up. Got plans for a house, a barn, corrals, going to raise horses. Good stock for working cattle. He paused, studying her face. You ever think about settling down? Really settling, I mean. Not just landing for a bit before moving on. The question was too perceptive, too knowing. Cora felt herself start to draw back into the protective shell she'd built around her heart. I settle where the work is, she said carefully. Mrs. Fletcher has been kind enough to employ me. As long as she needs help, I'll stay. And after that? After that? Cora looked down at Evan, who was taking tiny bites of his chocolate, his face blissful. After that, we'll see. It was the truth, though not all of it. The whole truth was that she never planned more than a few weeks ahead, never allowed herself to imagine a future where she and Evan could stay in one place. Men like Robert Cunningham had taught her that stability was an illusion, a trick played on foolish girls who believed in promises. Mama, this is the best chocolate in the whole world, Evan announced, chocolate smeared around his mouth. I'm sure it is, baby. Cora pulled a handkerchief from her pocket and gently wiped his face. What do you say to Mr. Avery? Thank you, Mr. Avery. Evan beamed up at the cowboy. You're very nice. You're welcome, partner, and you can call me Colt if your mama doesn't mind. Evan looked at Cora with hopeful eyes, and she found herself nodding. It seemed a small thing to give, this permission for informality, but it also felt dangerous, like opening a door she'd worked hard to keep closed. The afternoon wore on and still Colt didn't leave. He sat with them beneath the oak tree, telling Evan stories about horses and cattle drives, about sleeping under stars so thick they looked like spilled sugar. His voice was low and steady, the kind of voice that made you want to listen, to believe in the possibilities he described. Cora tried to maintain her guard, but exhaustion and the simple pleasure of companionship wore at her defenses. She found herself relaxing incrementally, her shoulders dropping from their usual tense hunch, her hands unclenching in her lap. You're good with children, she said during a lull in Colt's stories. Evan had climbed down from the bench to chase a butterfly, staying carefully within sight as she'd taught him. I like kids. They're honest. No pretense, no games. They say what they mean and mean what they say. He watched Evan dart after the butterfly, his expression fond. That's a good boy you've got there. He is. Pride and fierce love swelled in Cora's chest. He's the best thing I ever did. The words slipped out before she could stop them, raw and revealing. She waited for Colt to ask the obvious questions. Where's his father? Why isn't there a husband? What kind of woman? But Colt just nodded. I can see that. He's lucky to have you. The simplicity of it, the lack of judgment, the easy acceptance, made Cora's eyes burn with unshed tears. She turned her face away, blinking rapidly, trying to compose herself. Miss Bennett, Colt's voice was gentle. I don't know your story, and I don't need to, but I know meanness when I see it, and I saw the way Mrs. Halstead looked at you, way some of the other women did too, and I want you to know something. She forced herself to look at him. Whatever you've been through, whatever happened to bring you here, that's your business. But judging you for it, that's not right. And any man worth his salt would see what I see. A woman working hard to take care of her child. A woman with courage. He paused. Takes a lot more bravery to face down a town's whispers than it does to face down a mean rooster. Something cracked inside Cora's chest, some wall she'd built brick by bitter brick. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she wasn't brave, that she was a coward who'd let fear dictate her life for 2 years, but the words wouldn't come. Thank you, she whispered instead, for saying that. I mean it. Colt pushed off from the tree. And I hope you won't mind if I stop by the boarding house sometime. Pay a proper visit. Maybe teach Evan here how to skip stones, if there's a creek nearby. Evan, who'd given up on the butterfly, ran back to them. Did you say skip stones? I don't know how to do that. Well, that's something we'll have to fix. Colt ruffled Evan's hair. Can't have a young man growing up not knowing how to skip stones. Can he, Mama? Can Colt teach me? Cora looked from her son's eager face to Colt's steady gaze. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to protect herself and Evan from the inevitable disappointment when this kind cowboy moved on with his life and forgot about them. But Evan was looking at her with such hope, such hunger for male attention and guidance, that she couldn't bring herself to crush it. "If Mr. Avery has time," she said carefully, "and if you promise to be on your best behavior." I promise, Evan bounced on his toes. "When can you teach me? Tomorrow?" Colt laughed, a warm, rumbling sound. "Tell you what, partner, I'm starting work on building my cabin this week. But come Sunday afternoon, if your mama says it's all right, we can head down to the creek and have a stone skipping lesson." "Sunday," Evan repeated reverently, as if it were Christmas. "Sunday," Colt confirmed. He touched his hat brim to Cora. "Miss Bennett, it's been a genuine pleasure. Thank you for the company. Thank you for the candy, and for—" She gestured helplessly, unable to find words for what he'd given her, not just sweets and kindness, but a few hours where she'd felt almost normal, almost like a woman who belonged in the world. "No thanks needed. I'll see you around town." He started to walk away, then paused and turned back. "And Miss Bennett, don't let them make you feel like you have to hide. You and Evan, you've got just as much right to be here as anyone." Then he was gone, disappearing into the festival crowd, leaving Cora sitting on the bench with her sleeping son and a paper bag of candy and a strange, fluttering feeling in her chest that she recognized with equal parts terror and longing as hope. The sun was setting when they finally made their way back to the boarding house. Mrs. Fletcher was on the porch, smoking her pipe and watching the last stragglers from the festival wander past. "Have a good time?" the older woman asked as Cora climbed the steps, Evan drowsing in her arms. "We did." Cora shifted Evan's weight. He was getting too big to carry comfortably, but she wasn't ready to stop yet. These moments, when he was small and soft and safe in her arms, felt numbered, precious. "Saw you talking to the new fellow, Colt Avery." Mrs. Fletcher puffed on her pipe, her eyes sharp. "Good man, from what I hear. Quiet, hard worker. Saved up for 8 years to buy his own land. That takes discipline." Cora nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Also saw Delilah Halstead having a conniption fit when he walked you through the crowd." Mrs. Fletcher chuckled. "That woman's got a stick up her backside the size of a fence post. Don't you pay her no mind, you hear?" "Yes, ma'am." "And Cora?" Mrs. Fletcher waited until Cora looked at her. "It's all right to let people be kind to you. Won't make you weak, won't make you foolish. Sometimes kindness is just kindness." "Sometimes," Cora agreed, "but not always. Not usually." She'd learned that lesson too well to forget it now. She carried Evan up to their small room on the second floor, laid him on the narrow bed they shared, and carefully pulled off his shoes. He stirred but didn't wake, his face peaceful in sleep, one small hand still clutching the waxed paper that had held his chocolate. Cora sat beside him in the growing dark, not bothering to light the lamp. Below she could hear the sounds of the boarding house settling for the night. Footsteps in the hallway, the creak of bed springs, someone coughing in the next room. She thought about Colt Avery and his easy kindness, about the way he'd looked at Evan without pity or judgment, about his steady voice saying, "You've got just as much right to be here as anyone," but rights didn't matter if no one respected them. She'd learned that too. Still, as she lay down beside her son and pulled the thin blanket over them both, Cora allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to stay in Silverside. To stop running. To let Evan grow up in one place, with familiar streets and friends, and maybe, just maybe, a kind cowboy who kept his promises. It was a dangerous dream, the kind that could break your heart. But in the darkness, with her son's warm breath against her shoulder and the memory of Colt's smile still fresh in her mind, Cora let herself dream it anyway. Outside, the last sounds of the Founders' Day festival faded into silence, and the stars came out one by one over the town of Silverside, indifferent and eternal as hope. The Sunday afternoon arrived with a clarity that made Cora nervous, as if the universe itself was conspiring to strip away her excuses. The sky stretched endless and blue above Silverside, and Evan had been awake since dawn, pestering her about the stone-skipping lesson until she'd finally snapped at him, something she immediately regretted when she saw his face crumple. "I'm sorry, baby," she'd said, pulling him close. "Mama's just tired." But tired wasn't the right word. Terrified was closer to the truth. Terrified that Colt Avery wouldn't show up, and she'd have to watch her son's disappointment. Terrified that he would show up, and she'd start believing in things she had no business believing in. Mrs. Fletcher had given her the afternoon off without being asked, which meant the older woman had either remembered the promise or had been listening at keyholes. Probably both. Mrs. Fletcher missed very little that happened under her roof. At 2 o'clock, Cora stood on the boarding house porch with Evan, who was practically vibrating with anticipation. She'd dressed him in his Sunday clothes, the only outfit he owned without patches, and braided her own hair with trembling fingers. It wasn't meant to be anything special, she told herself. Just a man teaching a boy to skip stones. People did that sort of thing all the time. Except people didn't do that sort of thing for her. Not for the woman with a child and no husband. Not for the girl who'd made the wrong choice and refused to disappear with the evidence of her sin. "Do you see him, Mama? Is he coming?" Evan stood on tiptoe, craning his neck to see down the dusty street. "I don't know, sweetheart. We'll wait a few more minutes, and if he doesn't— Miss Bennett!" Cora turned to find Colt walking up the street, and her breath caught in her throat. He'd cleaned up since the festival, his hair still damp from washing, his shirt pressed. He carried a small bundle under one arm and walked with that same easy confidence she remembered, as if he had every right to be there and no doubt whatsoever about his welcome. "Colt!" Evan launched himself off the porch with the reckless abandon of childhood, and Colt caught him with a laugh, swinging him up. "Whoa there, partner! You trying to bowl me over?" He set Evan down but kept a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You ready for that stone-skipping lesson?" "I've been ready since forever. Mama said we had to wait until 2 o'clock, and I watched the clock in the dining room for hours and hours." 15 minutes, Cora corrected, but she was smiling despite herself. "He watched it for 15 minutes. "Well, that's mighty patient of you." Colt's eyes met hers over Evan's head, warm and teasing. "Some folks can't stand to wait even that long for something they're looking forward to." Was he talking about Evan or about something else? Cora felt heat rise in her cheeks and looked away, fussing with her shawl even though the afternoon was warm. "I brought something," Colt said, holding up the bundle. "Thought we might have a picnic after the lesson, if that suits you, Miss Bennett. Nothing fancy. Just some bread and cheese and apples from Mrs. Chen's store. But a man works better on a full stomach, and I figured teaching stone skipping was serious business." "Can we, Mama? Please?" Evan bounced on his toes, and Cora found herself nodding before she could think of all the reasons why spending more time with Colt Avery was a terrible idea. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Avery." "Colt," he reminded her gently. "We're friends, remember? Friends." That word again, offered so easily, as if friendship was simple for him. As if he didn't know that friendship with someone like her could cost him standing in a town like Silverside. They walked through town toward the creek that ran along the western edge, and Cora was acutely aware of the eyes that followed them. Mrs. Morrison sweeping her porch, old Tom Jefferson sitting outside the saloon, the Patterson twins playing in their yard, all of them watching, calculating, adding this new piece of information to whatever story they were constructing about Cora Bennett and her mysterious past. Colt seemed oblivious to the attention, or perhaps he simply didn't care. He kept up a steady stream of conversation with Evan, asking about the boy's favorite foods, his favorite animals, what he wanted to be when he grew up. "A cowboy," Evan declared without hesitation. "Like you." "That's a fine ambition. Cowboys need to know all sorts of skills, though. Can you tie knots?" "No, sir." "Can you tell which way is north without a compass?" "No, sir." "Can you skip stones?" "Not yet." Evan grinned up at him. "But I'm going to learn today." "That's the spirit. A man who's willing to learn can accomplish just about anything." Colt glanced at Cora. "Your mama's been teaching you to read, I hope?" "Yes, sir. Mama reads to me every night. Right now we're reading about knights and dragons." "Knights and dragons, huh? That's good learning. Cowboys need to know their letters just like anybody else. How else can you read a brand or write a letter to your sweetheart?" Evan giggled. "I don't have a sweetheart." "Give it time, partner. Give it time." The creek appeared through a stand of cottonwood trees, its water running clear and slow over smooth stones. The sound of it was peaceful, a gentle burbling that seemed to wash away the tension Cora had been carrying in her shoulders. "This is perfect," Colt said, setting down his bundle near the bank. Shallow water, lots of flat stones. Couldn't ask for better. All right, Evan, first thing a cowboy needs to know about skipping stones is that not just any rock will do. You need a flat one, smooth, about the size of your palm. Go on and find a few. We'll pick the best ones. Evan scampered along the bank, examining stones with intense concentration. Colt moved to stand beside Cora, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the afternoon sun. He's a good boy, Colt said quietly. Smart, curious, well-mannered. You've done fine work raising him. Cora's throat tightened. Compliments about Evan always undid her, cutting through her defenses like nothing else could. Thank you. I try. It's not always easy. I imagine not. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was careful. Is his father in the picture at all? There it was. The question she'd been dreading. Cora kept her eyes on Evan, watching him crouch by the water's edge. No, she said simply. He's not. She waited for the follow-up questions, the ones everyone always asked. What happened? Where is he? Did he die or did he leave? But Colt just nodded, as if her answer was sufficient. That must be hard. For both of you. We manage. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, years of defensive anger giving them an edge. She forced herself to soften. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be rude. It's just, people usually have opinions about my situation. I'm not people, Colt said. He turned to look at her fully, his expression serious. And I told you at the festival, I don't need to know your story to see what's in front of me. A woman taking care of her child the best way she knows how. That's all that matters to me. Look, Mama, I found a good one. Evan came running back, his hand full of stones. Cora blinked rapidly, willing away the tears that threatened. Let's see what you've got, baby. Colt crouched down to examine Evan's collection, his large hands gentle as he turned each stone over. This one here, see how flat it is? And smooth on both sides? That's what we want. This one's too round. It'll just plop into the water. But these three, these are winners. For the next hour, Colt worked with Evan on the mechanics of stone skipping. How to hold the stone. How to flick your wrist just so. How to throw low and fast so the stone kissed the water at the right angle. Cora sat on the bank, her skirts tucked around her legs, watching her son laugh and try and fail and try again, never once getting discouraged because Colt was there, patient and encouraging, celebrating every small improvement. That's it! You almost got it that time. Did you see how it bounced once before it sank? One more try, just a little more wrist. And then Evan did it. The stone skipped twice across the surface of the creek before disappearing with a plop, and the boy let out a whoop of triumph so loud it startled a flock of birds from the cottonwoods. Did you see, Mama? Did you see? I did it! I saw, sweetheart. That was wonderful. Evan turned to Colt, his face radiant. Can I do it again? Please? Of course you can. Practice makes perfect. See if you can get 3 skips this time. Cora watched them, these 2 figures at the water's edge, and felt something crack wider in her chest. Evan looked so happy, so completely at ease in a way she rarely saw. And Colt looked like he was exactly where he wanted to be, teaching a 4-year-old boy to skip stones, his face patient and kind. When Evan finally tired of practicing, Colt suggested they have their picnic. He spread out a blanket from his bundle, faded but clean, and set out the food with the same care he'd shown teaching Evan. Bread and cheese like he'd promised, but also hard-boiled eggs, apples, and a small jar of honey. The honey's from the Johnson's place, he explained. They keep bees. Best honey I've ever tasted. They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the creek and the wind in the cottonwoods, and Evan's occasional exclamation about something he'd seen, a fish jumping, a turtle on a rock, a dragonfly with blue wings. Mr. Avery, I mean Colt, Evan said suddenly, his mouth full of bread and honey. Are you going to stay in Silverside forever? Evan, don't talk with your mouth full, Cora chided, but Colt just smiled. That's the plan, partner. I bought land here, and I'm going to build a ranch. That's not the kind of thing a man does if he's planning to leave. Good. Evan took another bite, then added, Mama says we might have to leave sometimes, when the work runs out. Cora's face burned. She hadn't realized Evan had absorbed so much of her anxiety, her constant awareness that their place in any town was temporary and contingent. Is that right? Colt's eyes found hers across the blanket. Seems to me Mrs. Fletcher's mighty happy with your mama's work. Heard her telling folks at the Mercantile that Cora Bennett's the best cook and housekeeper she's had in 10 years. She said that? The words slipped out before Cora could stop them, hungry and hopeful. She did. Said she'd be a fool to let you go. He broke off a piece of cheese, his expression thoughtful. Of course, working at a boarding house is hard. Long hours, not much thanks. A woman with your skills could probably do other things if she wanted. Run her own boarding house, maybe. Or work in a restaurant. Or, he paused, or help run a ranch, if the right opportunity came along. The air between them suddenly felt charged, full of unspoken meanings. Cora's heart beat faster, even as her mind screamed warnings. Colt, can I ask you something? Evan's voice broke the tension. Sure, partner. Do you have a family, like a wife and kids? Evan! Cora's mortification was complete. That's not an appropriate question. But Colt just laughed. It's all right. It's a fair question. No, Evan, I don't have a wife or kids. I've been too busy working and saving for my ranch. Figured I'd get the land settled first, build a proper house, get the cattle operation going. Then maybe I'd think about finding a wife. He was looking at Cora again, his gaze steady. Though I'm starting to think maybe I had my priorities wrong. Maybe the most important things shouldn't wait until everything else is perfect. Cora couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The implication in his words was so clear, so direct, that there was no pretending she'd misunderstood. Why not? Evan asked, blessedly oblivious. Why shouldn't things wait? Because life doesn't wait, partner. Because sometimes you meet people who matter, and if you put off doing something about it, you might lose your chance. Like what? Like telling someone they're important to you, like asking someone to take a walk with you, or teaching their son to skip stones, or... He finally looked away from Cora, focusing on Evan with a gentle smile. Or asking if you can come around again next Sunday. Maybe teach you how to tie some cowboy knots. Yes, yes, please. Evan bounced with excitement, scattering crumbs. Can he, Mama? Can Colt come teach me knots? Cora's hands trembled as she smoothed her skirt. This was moving too fast, pushing past all the careful boundaries she'd constructed. But when she looked at Evan's eager face, at the happiness there that she so rarely saw, she couldn't find it in herself to refuse. If Mr. Avery wants to, she said carefully, and if he's not too busy with his ranch work. I'll make time, Colt said. Building a ranch is important, but it's not everything. A man needs friends, needs connections, needs... His eyes met hers again. Needs reasons to come into town on Sundays. They packed up the picnic as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Evan ran ahead on his walk back to town, darting from one interesting sight to another. A lizard on a rock, a flower he wanted to pick for his mother, a particularly straight stick that would make an excellent sword. He's going to sleep well tonight, Colt observed, watching the boy with amusement. He will. Thank you for this. For today. Cora struggled for words. He doesn't have many people in his life. It means a lot to him, having someone pay attention to him like this. It means a lot to me, too. Colt's voice was quiet, serious. I meant what I said, Cora. May I call you Cora? She nodded, not trusting her voice. I'd like to keep coming around, spending time with you and Evan, getting to know you both better, if that's all right with you. Why? The question burst out of her, desperate and raw. Why would you want that? You don't know anything about me, about what people say, about what I... She stopped, biting back the confession that threatened to spill out. I know enough, Colt said firmly. I know you're brave and hardworking. I know you're a good mother. I know you've been hurt and you're scared and you're doing your best to protect yourself and your boy. That's enough for me to want to know more. People will talk, Cora warned. They already are, probably. Mrs. Halstead will make sure of that. Let them talk. I'm not courting Mrs. Halstead's opinion. He paused. I am courting you, though. In case that wasn't clear. Cora stopped walking, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Colt, you can't. You don't understand. I can't. Can't what? Be courted? Be happy? Have someone care about you? His voice was gentle but insistent. Because I think you can. I think you've just forgotten how. I haven't forgotten. I remember perfectly well how it works. Man makes promises, woman believes him. Man leaves when things get difficult or inconvenient. Woman is left to deal with the consequences alone. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. That how Evan's father did things? Colt asked quietly. Cora wrapped her arms around herself, cold despite the warmth of the evening. She'd never told anyone the full story. Mrs. Fletcher knew some of it, had pieced together enough to understand the basics, but no one knew the details, the specific ways Robert Cunningham had broken her heart and her life. Yes, she said finally, that's exactly how he did things. Made beautiful promises, talked about our future, our life together, made me believe I was special, that he loved me. And then when I told him about the baby, her voice cracked. He told me I was a liar trying to trap him. Said the child probably wasn't even his. Gave me $50 and told me to take care of it. When I refused, when I said I was keeping the baby, he made sure everyone knew I was a loose woman who tried to force him into marriage with false claims. The words hung in the air between them, ugly and true. Cora waited for disgust, for Colt to make excuses and disappear like morning mist. Instead, he reached out and took her hand, just held it, his palm warm and rough and steady against hers. That man was a coward and a fool, he said, his voice hard. And I'm sorry he hurt you. But I'm not him, Cora. I don't make promises I can't keep, and I don't abandon people when things get hard. My word means something. Everyone says that at first, Cora whispered. Then I'll just have to prove it to you, however long it takes. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm a patient man, and I'm not going anywhere. Evan came running back to them, holding a dandelion gone to seed. Mama, make a wish. Cora took the dandelion, its white fluff trembling in the evening breeze. She looked at her son's expectant face, at Colt's steady presence beside her, at the town of Silverside spread out ahead of them with all its judgment and possibility. She closed her eyes and blew, sending the seeds spiraling into the sky like tiny prayers. When they reached the boarding house, Mrs. Fletcher was on the porch again, rocking in her chair. She nodded at Colt, her eyes shrewd but not unkind. Evening, Mr. Avery. See you got them back in one piece. Yes, ma'am. We had a fine time. Evan here learned to skip stones. Did he now? That's a valuable skill. Mrs. Fletcher's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. You planning on teaching him anything else? If Miss Bennett permits, I thought I might come by next Sunday. Teach him some rope knots. Rope knots, Mrs. Fletcher repeated, her expression unreadable. She looked at Cora. That suit you? Cora felt the weight of the older woman's gaze, the question beneath the question. Mrs. Fletcher had been kind to her, given her work when she desperately needed it, asked no uncomfortable questions. But this was different. This was allowing a man to court her openly, where everyone could see. Yes, ma'am, Cora heard herself say. That suits me fine. Mrs. Fletcher nodded slowly. Good. A boy needs a man's teaching sometimes, things a mother can't provide, no matter how hard she tries. She turned her attention back to Colt. You're welcome to visit, Mr. Avery, long as your intentions are honorable. They are, ma'am. I promise you that. See that they stay that way. Mrs. Fletcher stood, gathering her shawl. Come on, Evan. Let's get you inside and washed up for supper. Your mama will be along shortly. Evan hugged Colt's legs fiercely. Thank you for teaching me to skip stones. Next time, will you teach me about horses, too? Next time, Colt agreed, ruffling the boy's hair. Go on now. Mind Mrs. Fletcher. When they were alone on the porch, Colt turned to Cora. In the gathering dusk, his face was shadowed, but his eyes caught the last light, warm and intent. Thank you, he said, for today, for giving me a chance. You might regret it, Cora warned, when you see how people treat me, how they'll treat you, by association. Let me worry about that. He reached up, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so tender it made Cora's breath catch. I'll see you next Sunday, maybe before if I need to come into town for supplies. Maybe, Cora agreed, though her voice was unsteady. She watched him walk away into the deepening twilight, his form eventually disappearing around the corner of Main Street. Only then did she allow herself to lean against the porch railing, her legs suddenly shaky. "You all right?" Mrs. Fletcher's voice came from the doorway. Cora turned to find the older woman watching her with knowing eyes. "I don't know," Cora admitted. "I don't know what I'm doing." "You're living," Mrs. Fletcher said simply. "Maybe for the first time in a long while, you're actually living instead of just surviving. There's a difference, you know. It's dangerous. Living always is, but dying inside because you're too scared to take a chance? That's worse." Mrs. Fletcher moved to stand beside her, looking out at the darkening street. "That Avery fellow, he's good people. I've asked around about him. Works hard, saves his money, treats folks right. And the way he looks at you?" She shook her head. "Don't throw that away because you're scared, Cora. Fear's a poor master. What if he's like Robert? What if he promises things and then you'll survive it, just like you survived before? But what if he's not? What if he's exactly what he seems to be? A good man who sees a good woman and wants to build something real? You going to let fear steal that possibility?" Cora had no answer. She stood on the porch as full dark fell over Silverside, thinking about dandelion wishes and stone-skipping lessons, and a cowboy who said his word meant something. Upstairs, she found Evan already in his nightshirt, scrubbed clean, and sitting on their bed with his eyes bright. "Mama, I like Colt. Do you like him too?" Cora sat beside her son, smoothing his damp hair. "Yes, baby, I like him. Is he going to be our friend? For real, not just for a little while?" The question pierced her heart. Even at 4, Evan understood the temporary nature of their connections, the way people drifted in and out of their lives. "I hope so," she said honestly, "but we'll have to wait and see." "I hope so too." Evan yawned, his eyes already drooping. "He's the nicest man I ever met. Except for Mr. Chen, but Colt taught me to skip stones." "He did. That was very kind of him." "Mama," Evan's voice was sleepy now, fading toward dreams. "Do you think Colt could be my papa?" Cora's breath stopped. She'd known Evan felt the absence of a father. How could he not, when every other child in town had one? But he'd never asked about it so directly before. "Oh, sweetheart, that's complicated." "Why? Don't papas just love mamas and their kids? Colt said he likes us. He could love us if he wanted to." Out of the mouths of children, Cora held her son close, blinking back tears. "It's not quite that simple, baby. But maybe someday. We'll see." "Okay." Evan snuggled against her, already half asleep. "I'm going to wish for it every night on the stars. Mrs. Fletcher says star wishes are powerful." "They are," Cora whispered. "They truly are." She lay beside Evan in the darkness, listening to his breathing deepen into sleep, thinking about the day that had just passed. She thought about Colt's patience teaching Evan to skip stones, about the way he'd held her hand when she told him about Robert, about his steady voice saying, "I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in 2 years, Cora allowed herself to imagine a future that extended beyond next week, next month. She imagined Sundays with Colt becoming a regular thing, imagined Evan learning all the skills a boy needed from a man who cared about him, imagined, with a terror that was almost painful, what it might feel like to be courted by someone honorable, to be loved, even, though that seemed too much to hope for. Outside, stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human wishes but bearing them anyway, the way they'd borne the hopes and dreams of countless souls throughout time. Somewhere in the darkness, Colt Avery was probably at the small room he rented at the Rockingham Ranch, perhaps thinking about the same things she was thinking about. And in that small room at the boarding house, Cora Bennett fell asleep with her son in her arms, and something very much like hope blooming cautiously in her chest, fragile as dandelion seeds, and just as determined to take root wherever they landed. The next morning, when she came downstairs to start breakfast, she found a bundle on the kitchen table, wrapped in brown paper, tied with string. Her name was written on a small card in careful handwriting. Inside, she found a length of soft blue ribbon, the exact color of the sky yesterday afternoon, and a small wooden horse carved with obvious care, its mane flowing and its legs captured in mid-gallop. The note said simply, "For Evan." Thought he might like to have a horse of his own to practice his cowboy skills with. The ribbon is for you, if you want it. No strings attached, just like the ribbon itself. Until Sunday. See, Cora stood in the quiet kitchen holding the gifts, and for the first time in years she smiled at the day ahead with something other than dread. It was a small thing, that smile, but it was a beginning. And beginnings, she was learning, were worth more than she'd given them credit for. The carved wooden horse became Evan's most treasured possession, rarely leaving his small hands during the 3 weeks that followed. Cora watched her son gallop the toy across every surface in the boarding house. The kitchen counter while she cooked, the dining table during meals, the windowsill in their room at night, and felt her careful walls crumbling with each passing day. Colt came every Sunday without fail, rain or shine. He taught Evan to tie a bowline knot, then a clove hitch, then a lasso loop. He brought stories about the progress on his cabin, about the horses he was training at the Rocking M, about the land he was slowly transforming into something resembling a ranch. And he brought small gifts that seemed thoughtless but weren't. Wildflowers picked on his ride into town, a book of frontier tales for Evan, a jar of preserves from a neighbor who'd heard Cora liked blackberries. He never pushed, never demanded more than she was willing to give. But his presence became as regular as Sunday itself, something Cora found herself anticipating despite every warning her wounded heart whispered. Mrs. Fletcher watched it all with approval, though she said little. Other residents of the boarding house began greeting Colt when he arrived, and Mr. Hendricks, who occupied the corner room, started joining their conversations on the porch, talking cattle prices and weather patterns with the easy camaraderie of men who understood hard work. But not everyone in Silverside viewed Colt's courtship with such equanimity. Cora felt the weight of disapproving stares when she walked through town, heard the whispers that cut off abruptly when she entered the general store. Mrs. Halstead's campaign of moral outrage had found fertile ground among certain segments of Silverside society, and they watched Cora's slowly blossoming relationship with Colt like vultures waiting for weakness. "Ignore them," Mrs. Fletcher counseled one afternoon when Cora came back from the mercantile with tears threatening. "Small minds need small targets. You're just convenient." But ignoring them became harder when the ladies' social committee announced their monthly gathering would include a potluck supper at the church. The invitation was extended to the entire town, painted as a celebration of community and fellowship. Mrs. Fletcher encouraged Cora to attend. "You can't hide forever," the older woman said, her voice firm but not unkind. "And Colt will be there. He told me himself he plans to escort you, if you'll have him." "That's exactly why I shouldn't go." Cora kneaded bread dough with more force than necessary, flour dusting her forearms. "It'll just give them more ammunition. Or it'll show them you're not ashamed, that you have just as much right to be there as anyone." Mrs. Fletcher leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "What are you teaching Evan if you keep hiding? That some people deserve to live in the light and others don't? That he should be ashamed of who he is?" The words hit like a physical blow. "That's not fair. Life's not fair. But you've got a choice about how you face it." Mrs. Fletcher's expression softened. "That boy worships you, Cora. And he's starting to worship Colt, too. Don't you think he deserves to see his mama stand proud? To see that cowboy claim you in front of everyone? What if Colt changes his mind? What if he realizes what he's taking on being associated with me and decides it's not worth it?" The fear that had been coiling in Cora's chest for weeks finally found words. What if this is all just temporary kindness before he moves on? Then you'll survive it. But what if it's not? What if he's exactly what he seems? A good man who sees a good woman and wants the world to see it too? Mrs. Fletcher pushed off from the counter. "Go to that social, Cora. Let him escort you. Let people see you're not afraid." But Cora was afraid. Terrified, in fact, as Saturday evening approached and she stood in front of the small mirror in her room, trying to make herself presentable. She'd sewn a new dress from fabric Mrs. Fletcher had given her, green calico with tiny white flowers, the nicest thing she'd owned in years. Her hands trembled as she fastened the buttons. "You look pretty, Mama." Evan sat on the bed, clutching his wooden horse, his own face scrubbed clean and his hair dampened and combed. "Thank you, baby." Cora turned from the mirror, abandoning the attempt to do anything elaborate with her hair. She'd braided it simply and wound it at the nape of her neck. It would have to do. Is Colt going to walk with us to the church? Yes, he is. Good. Evan's certainty was absolute, uncomplicated by doubt or fear. I like it when Colt's with us. People are nicer. The observation pierced Cora's heart. 4 years old, and already he'd learned that his reception in the world depended on who stood beside them. Colt arrived precisely at 6, dressed in clothes Cora had never seen him wear, pressed trousers, a white shirt, a vest that looked new. His hair was still damp from washing, and he held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. "You look beautiful," he said when he saw Cora, and the sincerity in his voice made her flush with pleasure and embarrassment in equal measure. "You clean up well yourself?" she managed. He grinned, some of his nervousness fading. "Figured if I was escorting the prettiest woman in Silverside, I ought to look the part." He crouched down to Evan's level. "And how are you, partner? Ready for some church social victuals?" "Mrs. Fletcher says there'll be pie." Evan's eyes were wide with anticipation. "Lots of different kinds." "Then we'd better get going before all the good slices disappear." Colt straightened and offered Cora his arm. "Shall we?" The walk to the church felt both too long and too short. Cora's heart hammered against her ribs as they approached the white building with its tall steeple, light spilling from the windows into the gathering dusk. Voices and laughter drifted out, the sounds of community and belonging that had been denied to her for so long. "It's going to be fine," Colt murmured, as if sensing her panic. "I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." The church social hall was packed with people when they entered. Long tables groaned under the weight of food, casseroles and roasts, breads and preserves, cakes and pies in dizzying variety. Children darted between adults, playing games that involved much shrieking and running. Men clustered in groups, talking business and weather. Women arranged dishes and served punch, their heads bent together in conversation. The room didn't fall silent when Cora entered on Colt's arm. That only happened in melodramas. But a perceptible shift occurred. Heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Eyes tracked their progress across the room with the intensity of hawks watching prey. Cora felt her face flush hot, her steps wanting to falter. But Colt's arm was steady under her hand, and Evan pressed against her skirts, his small presence giving her courage. "Evening, folks!" Colt's voice carried across the room, friendly and unbothered. "Fine gathering you've got here. Evan and I have been looking forward to it all week, haven't we, partner?" "Yes, sir. Mrs. Fletcher says there's apple pie and cherry pie, and why don't we find a place to set down these dishes Miss Bennett brought?" Colt guided them toward one of the food tables, where Mrs. Chen was arranging platters. "Miss Bennett, Mr. Avery." Mrs. Chen's welcome was genuine and warm. "What have you brought?" "Corn pudding and biscuits," Cora said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Nothing fancy." "Everything Miss Bennett makes is fancy," Colt said. "Best cook in Silverside, far as I'm concerned." Mrs. Chen took the dishes with approving nods, and Cora felt a small measure of tension ease from her shoulders. But then she caught sight of Mrs. Halstead across the room. The older woman's face pinched with disapproval, and the anxiety came flooding back. "Let's get Evan some food," Colt suggested. "Growing boy needs his strength." They filled plates and found seats at one of the long tables, joined shortly by Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, who operated the feed store, and their 3 children. Mrs. Henderson chatted pleasantly about the recent rain in her garden, asking Cora's advice about tomato plants with the easy friendliness of someone who saw no scandal in the seating arrangement. It was almost nice, almost normal. Cora began to relax incrementally, watching Evan devour his food with single-minded determination to save room for pie. She even found herself laughing at one of Mr. Henderson's stories about a confused cow that had wandered into his store. Then Mrs. Halstead's voice cut across the pleasant murmur of conversation like a knife through silk. "I'm surprised to see certain people here tonight." The room didn't fall silent, but it quieted. Enough that everyone could hear. Enough that there was no pretending Mrs. Halstead wasn't making a public statement. Cora's stomach dropped. She felt Colt's hand find hers under the table, his grip warm and firm, but it did little to stop the dread spreading through her chest. Mrs. Halstead had positioned herself near the center of the room, her posture rigid with righteous indignation. Beside her stood three other women from the ladies' social committee, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to smugly satisfied. After all, Mrs. Halstead continued, her voice carrying with practiced ease, this is a church function, a gathering of respectable families. I wouldn't have thought someone like Miss Bennet would feel comfortable among decent people. The room was definitely quiet now. Conversations had stopped entirely. Even the children sensed something wrong and stilled their games. Cora wanted to disappear. Wanted to grab Evan and run, the way she'd run from 3 other towns when the judgment became too heavy to bear. Her throat closed up, words dying before they could form. But Colt was standing, rising to his full height with a deliberation that made the movement almost threatening. His face was calm, but there was steel in his eyes that Cora had never seen before. Mrs. Halstead, he said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the silent hall. I'm not sure what you're implying, but I think you ought to reconsider your words. I'm not implying anything, Mr. Avery. I'm stating facts. Mrs. Halstead's chin lifted. That woman has a child with no husband to claim him. She's been run out of how many towns now? 3? 4? And yet she comes here, to our church, as if she has the same standing as decent women who've kept themselves pure and married properly. Cora felt the words like lashes, each one drawing blood. Beside her, Evan had gone very still, his small face confused and frightened. He might not understand all the words, but he understood the tone, the cruelty beneath the righteous veneer. She has a son, Mrs. Halstead pressed on, emboldened by Cora's silence. A bastard child born of sin. And instead of showing proper shame, instead of accepting her fallen state with humility, she parades around town as if she's done nothing wrong. As if respectable men should court her in public, as if decent families should associate with her. That's enough. Colt's voice cracked like a whip, and Mrs. Halstead actually took a step back. You've said more than enough, ma'am. I have every right to express my concerns about the moral character of— You have the right to your opinions, Colt interrupted, and Cora had never heard his voice so hard, so cold. But you don't have the right to humiliate a woman who's done nothing but work hard and raise her son with love and dignity. You don't have the right to judge someone whose circumstances you know nothing about. And you sure as hell don't have the right to call a child a bastard in a church social hall while claiming to speak for Christian decency. Mrs. Halstead's face went from white to red. How dare you speak to me that way? I am a founding member of this church, a pillar of this community. Then act like it, Colt said flatly. He turned, his gaze sweeping the room, making eye contact with person after person. I've been in Silverside for about 6 weeks now. In that time, I've gotten to know Cora Bennet pretty well. I've watched her work from dawn until late at night at Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house, never complaining, always doing more than her share. I've seen her raise her boy with patience and kindness, teaching him to read and be polite and care about other people. I've seen her survive on scraps when she could, saving every penny to make sure Evan had what he needed. He paused, and in the silence, Cora could hear her own heart pounding. I don't know the circumstances that brought her to Silverside, Colt continued, though this was a lie. He knew now she'd told him 2 Sundays ago in a moment of weakness and trust. And I don't care. What I know is this. Miss Bennet is one of the most honorable women I've ever met. She's brave and strong and decent. She's survived things that would break most people, and she's done it while maintaining her dignity and her principles. She's worked hard to support herself and her son without asking for charity or making excuses. She's been nothing but kind to everyone in this town, even those who've treated her poorly. His eyes found Mrs. Halstead again. Can you say the same, ma'am? Can everyone here say the same? Or are some of you more concerned with appearances than actual virtue? More worried about what the neighbors think than about showing Christian charity to someone who's struggling? Christian charity is not the same as condoning sin, Mrs. Halstead said, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. No, it's not, Colt agreed, but condemning someone for the circumstances of their life? For doing their best in a world that's been unkind to them? That's not righteousness, Mrs. Halstead. That's cruelty dressed up in Sunday clothes. He moved then, stepping away from the table and walking to where Cora sat frozen, her face burning with humiliation and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. He extended his hand to her. "Miss Bennet," he said, his voice gentling, "would you do me the honor of taking a walk with me? I think the night air might be pleasant." Cora stared at his hand, at the calluses and scars from years of hard work, at the steadiness of it extended toward her in a room full of witnesses. She could feel every eye in the church social hall watching, waiting to see what she would do. If she took his hand, she would be accepting his public defense of her. She would be claiming the right to be courted, to be respected, to take up space in this community. It would be a declaration that she was not ashamed, that she would not hide anymore. If she refused, she would be retreating into the shadows again. Safer, perhaps, but also lonelier. And what would it teach Evan? That his mother was something to be ashamed of? That they deserved to be treated as less than others? Her hand shook as she placed it in Colt's. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and he helped her stand. "What about the boy?" someone called out. "Mr. Patterson," Cora thought, though she couldn't be sure through the rushing in her ears. Colt looked down at Evan, who was still sitting at the table, his eyes wide and frightened. "What do you say, partner? Want to come with us?" Evan nodded mutely and scrambled off the bench. Colt scooped him up with his free arm, settling the boy on his hip as naturally as if he'd been doing it for years. Then he turned back to the assembled crowd, and what he said next would echo through Silverside for months to come. "For those of you who don't know," he said clearly, "I'm courting Miss Bennet, properly and honorably, with the intention of marriage if she'll have me. I'm courting her because she's a remarkable woman, because her son is a fine boy who deserves a father who'll stand up for him, because I'm tired of living alone and I'd be proud to build a life with someone who understands hard work and sacrifice and love." Cora's breath stopped. Marriage. He'd said marriage in front of everyone, not as a vague possibility, but as an intention. "If that bothers any of you," Colt continued, his gaze sweeping the room one last time, "I invite you to examine your own lives and ask yourselves if you've lived them perfectly, if you've never made a mistake, never needed forgiveness, never required grace from others, and if you find you have lived perfectly," his voice turned dry, skeptical, "then by all means cast your stones. But do it from a distance, because Miss Bennet and I won't be staying to catch them." He guided Cora toward the door, still carrying Evan, moving with unhurried dignity through the silent crowd. No one tried to stop them. No one spoke. It wasn't until they were outside, the cool night air hitting Cora's flushed face, that she realized she was trembling violently. Her legs gave out, and she sank onto the church steps, her breath coming in gasps that might have been sobs if she'd let them be. Colt set Evan down gently. "Partner, can you do me a favor? Can you go pick some of those flowers over there? The yellow ones? I think your mama could use some cheering up." Evan nodded solemnly and trotted off toward the church garden, glancing back frequently to make sure his mother was all right. Colt sat beside Cora on the steps, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have prepared you better. Should have known someone like Mrs. Halstead would pull something like that." Cora shook her head, still unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. "I meant what I said in there," Colt continued. "Every word of it. About courting you, about—" He took a breath. "About marriage, if you'll consider it. I know it's fast. I know you barely know me. But I've known since that first day at the festival that you were special, and these past weeks have only confirmed it. You said—" Cora's voice came out cracked and small. "You said marriage in front of everyone." "I did." "Why? Why would you do that? Now everyone will know. Now you're tied to me, to my reputation. They'll judge you too. They'll make your life harder. Your business might suffer. People might not want to deal with you." "Cora," he turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face with such gentleness it made her want to weep. "Do you really think I care about any of that? Do you really think I'd let small-minded gossips dictate who I love?" "Love?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Yes, love. I love you. I love your strength and your courage. I love the way you put Evan first in everything. I love how hard you work, how you never complain even when things are difficult. I love the woman you are, Not some imaginary perfect version of you, but you, exactly as you are, with all your history and your fears and your scars. His thumbs brushed away tears Cora hadn't realized were falling. And I love Evan too. That boy deserves a father who'll be there for him, who'll teach him and protect him and show him what it means to be a good man. I want to be that father, if you'll let me. I'm not who you think I am, Cora choked out. I'm not strong or brave. I'm a coward who's been running for 2 years. I'm a fallen woman who made a stupid mistake when she was 17 and has been paying for it ever since. I'm damaged and scared and— You're human, Colt interrupted firmly. You're a human woman who got hurt by someone who should have protected you, who found herself alone and pregnant and did the brave thing by keeping her child when it would have been easier to give him up, who's worked herself to exhaustion to provide for that child, who's endured judgment and cruelty with dignity, who's never once stopped trying to build a better life for her son. His eyes bored into hers, intense and unwavering. That's not cowardice, Cora. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen. But everyone in there can go to hell for all I care, Colt said bluntly. Some of them will come around once they see we're serious. Some won't. That's their problem, not ours. Mrs. Fletcher supports us. The Hendersons seemed fine with it. Mr. and Mrs. Chen have always been kind. We'll find our people, and the rest can stay in their corners and judge. I'm not living my life according to Mrs. Halstead's rules. Cora stared at him, this man who'd walked into her life 6 weeks ago and somehow turned it upside down. He was offering her everything she'd thought she could never have: respect, partnership, a father for Evan, the possibility of belonging somewhere permanently. It was terrifying. It was too good to be true. It was exactly what she'd been too afraid to want. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. I don't know if I'm brave enough. You are, Colt said with absolute certainty. And you don't have to do it alone. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You've been alone for too long. Let me stand beside you. Let me help carry the weight. Mama! Evan came running back with a fistful of flowers, black-eyed Susans and wild asters, their petals slightly crushed from his tight grip. I got you flowers. Are you sad? Cora pulled her son against her, burying her face in his hair. I'm not sad, baby. Mama's feeling a lot of things right now. Colt made those mean people stop talking, Evan said matter-of-factly. He was very brave, like a knight in one of our stories. Over Evan's head, Cora met Colt's eyes. She saw patience there, and determination, and something that looked very much like the love he'd claimed. She saw a man who was willing to face down a town's disapproval for her, who'd stood in front of everyone and declared his intentions without shame or hesitation. She thought about Mrs. Fletcher's words. You can't hide forever. She thought about what she wanted to teach Evan about facing adversity, about standing up for himself, about believing he deserved good things. She thought about dandelion wishes and Sunday afternoons and the way her heart had started to unfold like a flower towards sun whenever Colt was near. Dance with me, Colt said suddenly. Cora blinked. What? Dance with me. Right here. He stood and extended his hand again. I can hear the music from inside. Someone's playing the piano, and I promised myself that if you let me court you, I'd dance with you at the first opportunity. I'm not letting Mrs. Halstead steal that from us. It was absurd. They were standing on the church steps. Anyone could look out and see them. The whole town was inside, probably still talking about what had just happened. But Cora found herself taking his hand and letting him pull her to her feet. He wrapped one arm around her waist and took her other hand in his, and they began to sway to the faint strains of Lorena drifting through the church windows. Evan sat on the steps and watched them, kicking his feet and humming along with the music. This is crazy, Cora murmured, but she was smiling despite herself. Probably, Colt agreed. But I've found that the best things in life usually are a little crazy. They danced in the churchyard under the emerging stars, and Cora felt something shift inside her. Not a complete healing, wounds that deep took more than one moment of courage to mend, but a beginning, a crack in the wall she'd built around her heart, letting light seep through. When the song ended, Colt didn't immediately release her. Instead, he rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her face. You don't have to give me an answer tonight, he said softly. About marriage, about any of it. Just know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. However long it takes for you to trust that, I'll wait. You're a very patient man, Cora said, echoing his words from weeks ago. For you, I'd wait a lifetime. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, gentle and chaste, and somehow more intimate than anything she'd experienced. Come on, let's get you and Evan home. It's been a long night. They walked back to the boarding house in silence, Evan between them holding both their hands and swinging his arms. The boy chattered about the flowers he'd picked, about the music he'd heard, about how Colt had been just like a hero in a storybook. Mrs. Fletcher was waiting on the porch, still dressed in her Sunday best, her expression unreadable in the lamplight. Heard what happened at the social, she said without preamble. Heard you gave them an earful, Mr. Avery. Word travels fast, Colt observed. Always does in a small town. Mrs. Fletcher's eyes moved to Cora. You all right, girl? Cora nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. Mrs. Fletcher stood. Well, I'll say this. About time someone stood up to Delilah Halstead. Woman's been terrorizing this town for 20 years with her moral superiority. You did everyone a favor, Mr. Avery, even if they're too scared to admit it. Appreciate that, ma'am. You're still welcome here, both of you. Anyone has a problem with that, they can take their business elsewhere. Mrs. Fletcher moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Cora, I raised your wages, starting Monday. Figure a woman who cooks like you and keeps this place running smooth deserves more than I've been paying. Should have done it sooner. She disappeared inside before Cora could respond, leaving the three of them standing on the porch in the warm night. I should get Evan to bed, Cora said finally. Of course. Colt crouched down one more time. Night, partner. You were very brave tonight. So were you, Evan said seriously. He threw his arms around Colt's neck in an impulsive hug that made the cowboy's eyes close briefly, his expression full of tenderness. Sleep well, Colt murmured, releasing him. Evan ran inside and Cora was left alone with Colt in the doorway. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that had been said and everything that remained unspoken. Thank you, Cora whispered, for what you did tonight. For standing up for me, for... Her voice broke. For making me feel like I matter. You do matter, Colt said fiercely. Don't ever doubt that. He left then, walking into the darkness toward the edge of town where his horse waited. Cora watched until she couldn't see him anymore, then went inside to find Evan already in his nightshirt, the wooden horse clutched in one hand and the crumpled flowers in the other. Mama, he said as she helped him into bed, are you going to marry Colt? The question hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying and full of possibility. I don't know yet, baby. Mama needs to think about it. I hope you do, Evan said, his eyes already drooping with exhaustion. I hope you marry him, and we can live at his ranch, and I can learn to ride horses and be a real cowboy, and then I'll have a papa, and you won't be sad anymore. Cora's vision blurred with tears. Oh, sweetheart. It's okay if you need to think about it, Evan added generously. Mrs. Fletcher says ladies need time to think about important things. But I think you should say yes. Colt's the best man in the whole world. He might be, Cora whispered, smoothing her son's hair. He just might be. She lay beside Evan in the darkness, listening to his breathing deepen into sleep, and thought about everything that had happened, about Mrs. Halstead's cruelty and Colt's fierce defense, about dancing under the stars, about the word marriage spoken aloud in front of witnesses, about the possibility, fragile as dandelion fluff but persistent as hope, that maybe, just maybe, she could stop running, that maybe she could build a life here in Silverside with a cowboy who saw her not as damaged or fallen, but simply as a woman worth fighting for. The decision didn't come that night, or even the next day, but something had shifted. Something fundamental had changed in that church social hall when Colt Avery had stood up and claimed her in front of everyone. For the first time in 2 years, Cora Bennett allowed herself to believe that she might deserve the life he was offering. And that belief, small as it was, felt like the beginning of something that could grow into forever. The days following the church social passed in a strange haze of tension and transformation. Cora expected backlash, prepared herself for the cutting remarks, and cold shoulders that had driven her from other towns. But Silverside surprised her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Some people did cross the street to avoid her. Mrs. Halstead's faction remained tight-lipped and disapproving, their silence more pointed than words. But others began greeting her with small nods of acknowledgement. Mrs. Henderson stopped by the boarding house with a basket of vegetables from her garden, saying only, "Thought you might could use these." Mr. Chen slipped Evan an extra piece of candy when she bought flour, his smile knowing and kind. Even Reverend Matthews sought her out after Sunday service, his weathered face gentle as he said, "Everyone's welcome in God's house, Miss Bennet. Don't let anyone tell you different." The town, it seemed, was divided, but for once, Cora wasn't standing alone on the wrong side of the divide. Colt came every day that week, not just Sundays. He'd stop by after his work at the Rocking M, dusty and tired, but always with time for Evan. He taught the boy to whistle, to identify bird calls, to understand which clouds meant rain was coming, and he talked to Cora, really talked, the way two people did when they were trying to build something that would last. He told her about growing up in Texas, the youngest of 5 boys on a struggling farm, about watching his parents work themselves to exhaustion and still lose the land when a drought lasted 3 years, about going to work for other men's ranches at 14, saving every penny while his brothers drifted into drinking and gambling and wasted lives. "I swore I'd be different," he said one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch while Evan chased fireflies in the yard. "Swore I'd build something that couldn't be taken away by bad luck or bad weather, something permanent." "Is that what the ranch means to you?" Cora asked. "Permanence?" "It's what everything means to me." His eyes found hers in the gathering dusk. "I'm tired of temporary, Cora. Tired of drifting from job to job, place to place. I want roots. Want to wake up in the same bed every morning, walk the same land, build something that'll outlast me." The weight of his words settled between them, heavy with implication. He was talking about the ranch, yes, but he was also talking about her, about them, about the family he wanted to build. "What if I can't give you that?" The fear escaped before she could contain it. "What if I'm too broken, too damaged by everything that's happened?" Colt reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "You're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference. How can you be so sure?" "Because I see you every day choosing courage over fear, working hard even when you're exhausted, being kind to Evan even when the world's been cruel to you. That's not broken, Cora. That's strong." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that she could be the woman he seemed to see when he looked at her. But doubt had roots that ran deep, nourished by years of shame and judgment. "I need to tell you something," she said abruptly. The words had been building in her for days, pressing against her chest like a physical weight. About Evan's father. About what really happened. "You don't have to—" "I do." She pulled her hand from his, needing the distance to get through what came next. "You said you'd marry me in front of the whole town. You defended me to Mrs. Halstead, but you're making promises based on assumptions. You deserve to know the truth before you decide if I'm really what you want." Colt settled back in his chair, his expression patient. "All right, I'm listening." Cora took a shaky breath and began. "His name was Robert Cunningham. I met him in Kansas City when I was 17, working as a seamstress in a dress shop. He was 24, from a wealthy family. His father owned a shipping company. He came into the shop to order a dress for his mother, and he—" She paused, remembering that first encounter with painful clarity. "He was charming, attentive. He made me feel special, like I was more than just a poor girl who sewed other women's pretty dresses." The memories flooded back, sharp and bitter. Robert's easy smile, the way he'd sought her out, returning to the shop again and again with transparent excuses. The flowers he'd sent. The walks they'd taken through the park, always careful to avoid anyone who might know his family. "He courted me for 3 months, Cora continued, her voice flat now, drained of emotion. "Said he loved me. Said we'd get married as soon as he convinced his father to approve the match. He knew his parents would object to him marrying beneath his station, so we had to keep it secret. I believed him. God help me. I believed every word." "Cora, let me finish, please." She gripped the arms of her chair, knuckles white. "He said we were as good as married in the eyes of God. That the ceremony was just a formality we'd handle later. And I wanted to believe I was loved, wanted to believe someone like him could choose someone like me. So when he said we should be together, that it was right because we were going to be married anyway, I agreed. The shame of it still burned, even after 5 years. The naivety, the desperate need to be wanted, the willingness to compromise every principle she'd been raised with because a handsome man said the right words. When I realized I was pregnant, I was scared but also excited. I thought Robert would be too. I imagined him marrying me quickly, our families coming together, everything working out. Her laugh was bitter. I was such a fool. You were 17 and in love, Colt said quietly. That's not foolish, that's human. He denied everything. Cora's voice cracked despite her efforts to stay composed. Said I was lying to trap him into marriage. Said if I really was pregnant, which he doubted, it wasn't his child. He gave me $50 and told me to take care of it. When I refused, when I said I was keeping the baby, he made sure everyone knew I was a loose woman trying to force him into marriage with false claims. His family had money and influence. My word meant nothing against his. She could still remember the humiliation of it, the way the other girls at the dress shop had whispered and pointed, the way Mrs. Gallagher, the shop owner, had fired her, saying she couldn't have that sort of reputation associated with her business. The way people she'd considered friends had suddenly become strangers, averting their eyes when she passed. I had some savings, enough for a room, and food for a few months. I thought maybe I could find other work, prove everyone wrong about me. But who hires a pregnant girl with no husband? I tried 3 different towns in Kansas, same story everywhere. As soon as my condition showed, I lost whatever job I'd managed to find. Her hands moved unconsciously to her stomach, remembering the fear of those months, the gnawing hunger she'd endured to save food for the baby, the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, terrified she wouldn't be able to care for the life growing inside her. Evan was born in a charity hospital in Wichita. They tried to convince me to give him up for adoption, said it was the best thing for both of us. But when they put him in my arms, tears spilled down Cora's cheeks unchecked. When I looked at his face, so perfect and innocent, I knew I couldn't do it. Whatever mistakes I'd made, however hard things would be, he was mine. I'd protect him. I'd love him. I'd make sure he knew he was wanted. And you have, Colt said, his voice rough with emotion. I've tried. God knows I've tried. Cora wiped at her face with shaking hands. We've moved 6 times in 4 years. Every time people found out about Evan, about me, it became impossible to stay. The whispers, the judgment, the way people treated him like he carried my sin. I couldn't bear it. So we'd pack up and move, and I'd hope the next town would be different. But it never was. She finally looked at Colt, expecting to see disgust or pity or disappointment. But his face showed only compassion, and something that looked like barely contained anger, though she knew instinctively it wasn't directed at her. That man, Colt said, his jaw tight, that coward who used you and abandoned you and his own child, I hope he lives long enough to regret it. I hope someday he realizes what he threw away. I'm telling you this so you understand what you'd be taking on, Cora pressed on. I wasn't seduced or forced. I made a choice. A stupid, naive choice. And Evan is the result. People will always see him as illegitimate. They'll always judge me as fallen. If you marry me, that stigma attaches to you too. People will question your judgment, your character. It could hurt your business, your standing in the community. Stop. Colt stood abruptly and crossed to her chair, kneeling in front of her so they were eye level. Stop telling me what I should think or feel or decide. I'm a grown man, Cora. I can make my own choices. But you need to understand, I understand perfectly. His hands came up to frame her face, gentle but firm, forcing her to meet his eyes. I understand that you were 17 and you fell in love with someone who lied to you. I understand that you've spent 5 years paying for one mistake while he's faced no consequences at all. I understand that you've worked yourself to exhaustion to care for a child you refused to abandon, even when it would have been easier. I understand that you've endured cruelty and judgment and kept going anyway. And I understand that I love you more now than I did before you told me all this. How? The word came out as a whisper. How can you still want me after knowing? Because your past doesn't scare me, Cora. It makes me respect you more. You survived. You protected your son. You kept your dignity and your kindness even when the world gave you every reason to become bitter and hard. That's the woman I want to marry. Not some imaginary perfect woman who's never struggled or suffered. You, exactly as you are. Cora couldn't hold back the sobs anymore. They broke free in great shaking waves, years of shame and fear and loneliness finally finding release. Colt pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried, murmuring reassurances against her hair. "I've got you," he said over and over. "I've got you, and I'm not letting go." When the tears finally subsided, Cora felt hollowed out, but somehow lighter, as if the telling had lanced a wound that had been festering for years. She pulled back, wiping her face with her sleeve, embarrassed by her loss of control. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to fall apart like that." "Don't apologize. You needed to let it out." Colt stood, pulling her up with him. "Come on, let's take a walk. I want to show you something." "But Evan is sound asleep on the porch swing." Colt nodded toward where Evan had curled up like a kitten, his wooden horse clutched in one hand. "Mrs. Fletcher's inside. She'll keep an ear out for him. He'll be fine for 20 minutes. Cora let Colt lead her down the porch steps and into the warm night. They walked in silence through the quiet streets of Silverside, past darkened houses and the occasional lamp burning in a window. The stars overhead were brilliant, undimmed by city lights, spreading across the sky in a river of light. Colt guided her to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie. He stopped near a small rise that overlooked the valley, the creek, a silver thread in the moonlight, the mountains dark shapes against the horizon. "This is my land," he said, gesturing to the expanse before them. 320 acres. Most of it's grazing land, but there's good water from the creek, timber in those hills for building, and enough flat ground for a house and outbuildings. Cora looked out at the moonlit landscape, trying to see it through his eyes. "It's beautiful." "It will be. Right now it's just potential, but I've got plans." His voice carried excitement, the enthusiasm of a man describing his dreams. "Going to build a house on that rise over there. Good view, catches the breeze in summer. Barn here, corrals beyond that. Start with horses, maybe add some cattle later. Build it slow, but build it right, so it lasts." He turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the starlight. "I started building the cabin 2 weeks ago. Been working on it every spare moment I have. It's not much yet, just the frame and part of the walls. But it'll be a good house when it's done. 2 bedrooms, a real kitchen, a front porch where a person could sit and watch the sunset. Room for a family." Cora's heart was pounding again, but differently now, with anticipation instead of fear. "I'm building it for us," Colt said simply. "For you and me and Evan. I'm building it because I can't imagine a future that doesn't have you in it. Because when I think about sitting on that porch watching the sunset, you're there beside me. When I think about raising horses and working this land, I see Evan helping me, growing up learning ranching and riding. When I think about what home means, what family means, I see you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, holding it up in the moonlight. A ring, simple gold, worn smooth with age. "This was my grandmother's ring," he said. "Only thing of value my mother had left to give me when I left home. She said to save it for someone special, someone who understood that real worth wasn't about money or station, but about character and heart." He took Cora's hand, holding it gently. "Marry me, Cora. Not because you need someone to take care of you. You've proven you can take care of yourself. Not because Evan needs a father, though he does, and I'd be honored to be that for him. Marry me because I love you, because I want to build a life with you. Because when I imagine my future, you're in every single moment of it." Cora stared at the ring, at Colt's earnest face, at the land spread out before them, full of possibility. Every rational part of her brain screamed warnings. It was too fast. She barely knew him. He was offering her everything she'd ever wanted, which meant it was probably too good to be true. But there was another voice, too, quieter but persistent. The voice that remembered being brave once, before the world had taught her to be cautious. The voice that wanted to believe in second chances and fresh starts and cowboys who kept their promises. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I'm so afraid of getting hurt again, of letting Evan get hurt." "I know," Colt said. "I can't promise you'll never be hurt. Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise I'll never deliberately hurt you. I can promise I'll work every day to be worthy of your trust. I can promise that when things get hard, and they will get hard. I won't run. I'll stay and we'll work through it together. What if I'm not a good ranch wife? What if I don't know how to do the things I'm supposed to do? Then we'll figure it out together. I don't need perfect, Cora. I just need you, your willingness to try, your heart. He paused. Tell me what you're thinking. Really thinking. Cora took a shaky breath, trying to organize the chaos of emotion swirling through her. I'm thinking that 6 weeks ago, I was alone and scared and convinced I'd spend the rest of my life moving from town to town, never belonging anywhere. I'm thinking that you walked into my life and made me feel things I thought I'd never feel again. Hope and happiness and the possibility of a real future. I'm thinking that Evan lights up whenever you're around in a way that breaks my heart because it reminds me how much he's been missing. She looked down at their joined hands, at the ring glinting in the moonlight. I'm thinking that I want to say yes so badly it terrifies me, because wanting something this much means it can destroy me if I lose it. You won't lose it, Colt said firmly. You won't lose me. I'm not Robert Cunningham. I'm not any of those men who made promises and broke them. When I say forever, I mean it. How can you be so sure? It was the question that haunted her, the doubt that kept her from fully surrendering to the possibility of happiness. Because I've spent my whole life working toward permanence, because I don't make decisions lightly, because when I commit to something, whether it's buying this land or courting you or raising Evan, I see it through. He squeezed her hand gently. And because I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. Never wanted anyone's happiness more than my own. Never been willing to stand in front of a hostile crowd and declare my intentions. Never imagined building a house and thinking about who'd cook in the kitchen or what color curtains would hang in the windows. You've changed everything for me, Cora. Made me realize that a ranch without a family to share it is just land and buildings. It's not a home. Cora felt the last of her resistance crumbling, the walls around her heart finally giving way under the steady pressure of Colt's devotion. She thought about Evan asking if Colt could be his papa, about Mrs. Fletcher saying it was all right to let people be kind to you, about dancing under the stars while a town full of judgmental people watched through windows. She thought about what it would mean to say yes, to commit to this man, this life, this future full of uncertainty and possibility, to stop running and start building, to choose courage over fear. Evan asked me if you were going to be his papa, she said quietly. The night of the church social. He said he hoped I'd say yes because you're the best man in the whole world. Colt's eyes shone suspiciously bright. That boy's got good judgment. He does. Mom, Cora smiled through fresh tears. He sees in you what I've been too scared to fully trust. Goodness, steadiness, safety. The kind of love that doesn't run when things get difficult. Is that a yes? Colt's voice was hopeful, almost boyish in its anticipation. It's a yes, Cora whispered, and then louder, stronger. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll build a life with you on this beautiful land. Yes, I'll let Evan have the father he deserves. Yes to all of it, to everything you're offering, to the future we can make together. Colt let out a whoop of joy that probably woke half the town and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and dizzy. When he set her down, he slipped his grandmother's ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all along for her hand. You've made me the happiest man in Montana Territory, he said, and then he kissed her. Not the chaste kiss on the forehead from before, but a real kiss, full of promise and passion and reverence. Cora kissed him back, pouring into it all the hope and fear and desperate longing she'd been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Colt rested his forehead against hers. When? He asked. How soon can we make this official? I don't know. There's so much to think about, to plan. 2 weeks, Colt said decisively. I'll have the cabin finished enough to move into. We can have the ceremony at the church. Show everyone we're not ashamed, that we belong here just as much as anyone. Mrs. Fletcher can help you with a dress if you want. We'll keep it simple but proper. What do you say? 2 weeks. It was impossibly soon and yet felt like an eternity. Cora wanted to be his wife now, immediately, before fear could reclaim its hold on her heart. 2 weeks, she agreed. But Colt, about the ceremony, people like Mrs. Halstead will make trouble. They'll say terrible things, Maybe even try to stop it. Let them try, Colt said, his voice carrying that steel she'd heard at the church social. We'll invite the whole town. Everyone who wants to come can come, and everyone who objects can stay home. We're not hiding anymore, Cora. We're not pretending we don't deserve happiness. We're getting married in the light of day, in front of God and everyone, and claiming our right to build a life together. The fierce certainty in his voice steadied something in Cora. He was right. She was done hiding, done letting other people's judgment dictate her choices. She'd made mistakes, yes, but she'd also survived them, raised a good son, worked hard to build a decent life. She deserved this chance at happiness. They walked back to town hand in hand, talking in excited whispers about practical matters, where they'd live until the cabin was finished, how to tell Evan, what needed to be done in the next 2 weeks, whether Cora would continue working at the boarding house or focus on setting up their home. Whatever you want, Colt kept saying. This is our life we're building, not just mine. Your voice matters just as much. When they reached the boarding house, they found Mrs. Fletcher on the porch with a sleeping Evan still curled on the swing. About time you two got back, the older woman said, but she was smiling. I was beginning to think I'd have to carry this boy to bed myself. We have news, Cora said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. She held up her left hand, the ring catching the porch lamplight. Mrs. Fletcher's smile widened. Well, it's about damn time. When's the wedding? 2 weeks, Colt said. And ma'am, I was hoping you might stand up with Cora, as her witness. She'll need someone in her corner, and I can't think of anyone better. Mrs. Fletcher's expression softened in a way Cora had never seen. I'd be honored, Mr. Avery, truly honored. She looked at Cora. You deserve this, girl. Don't let anyone tell you different. Thank you, Cora whispered, for everything, for giving me work when I needed it, for defending me, for being kind when the world wasn't. That's what decent people do, Mrs. Fletcher said gruffly. Now get that boy to bed, and you, Mr. Avery, go home and get some sleep. You've got a cabin to finish and a wedding to prepare for. Colt kissed Cora once more, gentle and sweet, before heading into the night. Cora gathered Evan into her arms. He was getting heavier, growing so fast, and carried him upstairs. She laid him in their bed and began changing him into his nightshirt, and his eyes fluttered open. Mama, did Colt go home? Yes, baby, but I have something to tell you, something wonderful. Evan sat up, immediately alert despite his sleepiness. What? Cora took his small hands in hers, looking into his precious face, so young, so full of trust and hope. Colt asked me to marry him, and I said yes. He's going to be your papa. We're going to be a real family. For a moment, Evan just stared at her, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Then his face split into the biggest smile Cora had ever seen, and he launched himself into her arms. Really? Really, truly? I'm going to have a papa? Really, truly, in 2 weeks we're going to have a wedding, and then we'll move to Colt's ranch and live there with him. You'll have a real house, a real home, and Colt will teach you everything about being a cowboy, just like you wanted. Evan pulled back, his eyes shining. Can I call him Papa now, or do I have to wait until the wedding? Cora laughed through happy tears. I think you should ask him, but I bet he'd like that very much. This is the best thing ever, Evan declared. Better than candy, better than stone skipping, better than anything. He paused, his expression turning serious. Mama, are you happy now? Really happy? Yes, baby, Cora said, and meant it with her whole heart. I'm really happy. Good. You deserve to be happy. Mrs. Fletcher says so. She says you're the kindest person in Silverside, and anyone who can't see that is a fool. Cora hugged her son tight, overwhelmed by love and gratitude and the stunning realization that her life was changing in ways she'd never dared to hope for. She had a man who loved her despite her past, a son who would finally have a father, a home waiting to be built, a future that stretched out bright and full of possibility. That night, lying in bed with Evan curled against her side, Cora looked at the ring on her finger and thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The pain and mistakes, the years of struggle and judgment, the towns she'd fled, and the shame she'd carried. All of it had led her here, to Silverside, to Colt, to this second chance she'd stopped believing existed. She thought about the girl she'd been at 17, naive and trusting, so desperate to be loved. She thought about the woman she'd become, scarred but stronger, cautious but still capable of courage. And she thought about the woman she was becoming, someone who could accept love without fear, who could build a future instead of running from the past, who could stand proud in the face of judgment and claim her right to happiness. In 2 weeks, she would walk down the aisle of Silverside's church and marry Colt Avery in front of whatever crowd gathered to witness it. Some would come to celebrate. Others would come to judge. But all of them would see that Cora Bennett was done hiding in shadows. She was stepping into the light, claiming her place in the world, building a family with a man brave enough to love her publicly and fiercely. It wouldn't erase the past. The scars would remain. But scars were proof of survival, evidence that she'd endured and overcome. And now, finally, she was ready to do more than just survive. She was ready to live. The 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of activity that left Cora breathless and occasionally terrified, but mostly filled with a cautious, growing joy she was learning to trust. Word of the engagement spread through Silverside faster than wildfire through dry grass, and the town's reaction cleaved along predictable lines. Mrs. Halstead and her followers pursed their lips and spoke in hushed, disapproving tones about the moral decay of modern society, but others surprised Cora with their support. Mrs. Chen arrived at the boarding house 3 days after the engagement with a bolt of ivory silk. "For your dress," she said simply, pressing it into Cora's hands before she could protest. "Every bride deserves something beautiful. Consider it a wedding gift." Mr. Henderson stopped Colt on Main Street to shake his hand and say, "You're getting a good woman, Avery. Anyone with eyes can see she's got more backbone than half the men in this territory." Even Reverend Matthews sought out Cora after Sunday service, his lined face kind. "I'd be honored to perform the ceremony, Miss Bennett, and I want you to know that you'll be married in a full church with all the dignity and respect any couple deserves." But it was Mrs. Fletcher who became Cora's anchor during those hectic days. The older woman threw herself into wedding preparations with surprising enthusiasm, helping Cora sew the dress from Mrs. Chen's silk, arranging for food and flowers, deflecting the worst of the gossip with sharp words and sharper looks. "Let them talk," Mrs. Fletcher said one afternoon as they worked on the dress in the boarding house parlor. "Half of them are jealous, and the other half are just afraid of anyone who doesn't fit their narrow little molds. You're getting married to a good man who loves you. That's more than most women can say, regardless of how proper their courtship was." Cora looked up from her stitching, her throat tight with emotion. "Why are you doing all this? Being so kind to me. You didn't have to hire me in the first place, much less stand with me through everything that's followed." Mrs. Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, her needle moving in steady practice strokes through the fabric. "I had a sister once," she said finally. "Younger than me by 3 years. Pretty thing, sweet-natured, trusting. Got herself in trouble with a boy who promised her the moon and delivered nothing but heartache. She tried to be brave about it, tried to make a life for herself and the baby, but the weight of everyone's judgment—" She paused, her hands stilling. "She died when the baby was born, hemorrhaged. The midwife said it was just one of those things, but I've always wondered if she'd gotten proper care earlier, if people had helped instead of shunned her, maybe she would have survived." "I'm so sorry," Cora whispered. "It was 40 years ago. Long time to carry regret, but there it is." Mrs. Fletcher resumed her sewing. "When you showed up here with that boy, desperate for work, wearing clothes that had been mended too many times to count, I saw my sister, saw the chance to do for you what nobody did for her. Maybe it won't change what happened to Anna, but it helps. Helping you helps." Cora reached across the fabric between them and squeezed Mrs. Fletcher's hand. "Thank you for seeing me, for giving me a chance. You earned everything you got, girl. Don't forget that. You worked hard, kept your head up, raised that boy right. All I did was not slam the door in your face. The rest was you." Evan, meanwhile, was practically floating through those 2 weeks. He followed Colt everywhere whenever the cowboy came to town, chattering endlessly about the ranch and the horses and what it would be like to have his own room in the new cabin. Colt listened with infinite patience, answering every question, taking Evan's enthusiasm seriously in a way that made Cora's heart swell. One evening, 5 days before the wedding, Colt took them out to see the cabin. Cora had been too busy to visit since he'd proposed, and when they crested the rise and she saw it, She stopped in her tracks. It was beautiful. Not grand or fancy, but solid and well built, with real glass windows and a porch that wrapped around two sides. The logs were freshly hewn and fit together with obvious care. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and golden light spilled from the windows into the gathering dusk. "You did all this in 2 weeks?" Cora breathed. "Had help from some of the boys at the Rocking M," Colt admitted. "They came out on their days off. Word got around about the wedding, and apparently there are more people rooting for us than I realized." He helped her down from the wagon, his hand steadying her. "Come see the inside." The interior was simple but spacious. A main room with a stone fireplace and real wooden floors. A kitchen area with a cast iron stove and a pump for water right inside the house. A luxury Cora hadn't expected. 2 bedrooms, one clearly meant for her and Colt, the other smaller but perfect for Evan. Handmade furniture, a table and chairs, a rocking chair, a bed frame in each bedroom. "The mattresses arrive tomorrow," Colt said, watching her face anxiously. "And I know it's not much, not fancy, like—" "It's perfect," Cora interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. "It's the most beautiful house I've ever seen." Evan had already claimed his bedroom, running from corner to corner with his wooden horse. "Look, Mama, my own room, and there's a window where I can see the horses. Can I get a real horse soon? Can I, Papa?" The word fell into the space between them like a stone into still water, ripples spreading outward. Evan froze, suddenly uncertain, looking from Colt to Cora with wide eyes. I asked Mama, and she said I should ask you if I could call you Papa, and I meant to ask proper, but it just came out, and—" Colt crossed the room in 3 long strides and scooped Evan up, holding him tight. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "You can call me Papa any time you want, partner. I'd be honored. He stopped, cleared his throat. "I'm going to do my best to be a good father to you, to teach you right from wrong, to keep you safe, to help you grow into a good man. And I'm going to love you like you're my own blood, because as far as I'm concerned, you are. From here on out, you're my son. Is that all right with you?" Evan wrapped his small arms around Colt's neck and nodded against his shoulder. "Yes, Papa." Cora turned away, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. Through the window, she could see the valley spreading out below, the creek catching the last light, the mountains standing eternal against the sky. This was going to be home. Not a temporary stopping place, not somewhere to hide until judgment drove them away again, but a real home where they would build a life. Colt set Evan down and sent him outside to explore the yard, then crossed to where Cora stood by the window. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. "You all right?" he murmured against her hair. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "In 4 days, we're getting married. This becomes real. What if I'm not ready? What if I can't be the wife you need, the partner you deserve?" "You already are. You've been ready since the moment you said yes." His arms tightened slightly. "I know it's scary, change always is, but we're in this together now. Your fears are my fears. Your struggles are my struggles. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore." "I'm not used to that. Depending on someone." "I know, but you're going to learn. We both are." He turned her in his arms so they were face to face. Marriage isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up every day and choosing each other, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Can you do that? Cora looked up at him, this man who'd walked into her life 8 weeks ago and turned it upside down, who'd seen past her shame to the woman beneath, who'd defended her publicly and loved her privately, who was building them a home with his own hands. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." The day before the wedding, Cora was fitting her dress for the final time when someone knocked on her door at the boarding house. She opened it to find a group of women standing in the hallway, Mrs. Henderson, Mrs. Chen, Mrs. Crawford from the bakery, and 3 others she recognized from church. "May we come in?" Mrs. Henderson asked. Cora stepped back, bewildered, and the women filed into her small room. Mrs. Henderson was carrying a basket, which she set on the bed. "We wanted to bring you some things," she said, "for tomorrow, for the wedding." "I don't understand," Cora said. Mrs. Chen smiled gently. "It's tradition here in Silverside. When a woman gets married, the other women bring her gifts, small things to help set up her household." "But I didn't expect—" Cora couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate that she hadn't expected to be treated like any other bride, to be included in the community's traditions. "Open it," Mrs. Crawford urged. Inside the basket were linens, dish towels, and tablecloths, embroidered with care. A set of preserves from various gardens. A beautiful quilt pieced from scraps of fabric in blues and greens. A cookbook with handwritten recipes tucked between the pages. A set of wooden spoons carved by someone's husband. "These are... You didn't have to..." Cora's voice broke. "We wanted to," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "You're one of us now. Or you will be tomorrow, officially. And we take care of our own." She paused, then added more quietly, "Not everyone in town feels the way Delilah Halstead does. Some of us have been where you are, in one way or another. Maybe not the exact same circumstances, but we've all faced judgment, all struggled, all needed grace. It's about time someone extended it to you." Mrs. Chen touched Cora's arm gently. "Every woman deserves to start her marriage with hope and support. Whatever happened in your past, whatever brought you here, that's behind you now. Tomorrow you begin again, fresh, clean, surrounded by people who wish you well." Cora couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so she just nodded and tried to blink back tears. The women stayed for an hour, offering advice about marriage and housekeeping, sharing stories about their own wedding days, treating Cora exactly as they would any other bride. When they left, she sat on the bed surrounded by their gifts and wept, not from sadness or shame, but from the overwhelming realization that she was being accepted, that these women saw her as worthy of their traditions, their welcome, their community. Mrs. Fletcher found her there an hour later, red-eyed and surrounded by linens. "Good crying or bad crying?" the older woman asked. "Good," Cora managed. "Definitely good." "Then get some sleep. You've got a wedding tomorrow, and you need to look your best. Show everyone what Colt Avery's getting, a beautiful, strong woman who deserves every bit of happiness coming her way." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of September day that seemed designed for new beginnings. Cora woke before dawn, her stomach a knot of nerves and anticipation. Beside her, Evan still slept, his face peaceful in the early light. Today she would marry Colt. Today she would stand before the town and claim her right to happiness. Today she would stop being Cora Bennett, the fallen woman with a shameful past, and become Cora Avery, rancher's wife, with a future stretching bright before her. The morning passed in a haze of activity. Mrs. Fletcher helped her bathe and dress, arranging her hair in a style more elegant than Cora had managed in years. The ivory silk dress fit perfectly, transforming her from a boarding house worker into something that looked almost like a proper bride. "You're beautiful," Mrs. Fletcher said gruffly, standing back to admire her work. "That cowboy of yours is going to forget how to breathe when he sees you." Evan was dressed in new clothes that Colt had bought for him, dark trousers and a white shirt, with a small vest that made him look impossibly grown up. He kept fussing with his collar until Cora knelt down and straightened it for him. "You look so handsome, baby. Like a little gentleman." "Do I look good enough to be Papa's son?" Evan asked, and the vulnerability in his voice broke her heart. "You look perfect, and you've always been good enough, Evan. Never doubt that. Not about Colt, not about anything. You are smart and kind and brave, and any man would be lucky to call you son." At 1 o'clock they made their way to the church. Cora's hands trembled as she approached the white building with its tall steeple. The same building where Mrs. Halstead had humiliated her just weeks ago. But this time she was walking toward it with her head high, Mrs. Fletcher on one side and Evan on the other, ready to claim her place. The church was packed. Every pew was filled, people standing in the back and along the walls. Cora's steps faltered when she saw the crowd, panic rising in her throat. So many people, so many eyes to witness her moment of truth. But then she saw Colt standing at the altar, and everything else faded. He was wearing a new suit, his hair freshly cut, his face clean-shaven. But it was his expression that undid her, the way his face transformed when he saw her, the pure joy and love and wonder written there so clearly that everyone in the church could see it. He saw her, really saw her, not the scandal or the shame, but the woman beneath, and he loved what he saw. Cora started down the aisle on Mrs. Fletcher's arm, and as she passed, she noted the faces, Mrs. Henderson smiling with tears in her eyes, Mr. Chen nodding encouragement, the Henderson children waving enthusiastically, the cowboys from the rocking M, uncomfortable in their Sunday clothes but grinning broadly, Reverend Matthews waiting with an open Bible and a gentle expression. And yes, Mrs. Halstead was there too, sitting stiffly in the third pew with her faction arrayed around her like soldiers. Their faces were pinched with disapproval, their presence a reminder that not everyone accepted this union. But they were outnumbered. For every person who came to judge, 2 more had come to celebrate. The church was full not because everyone wanted to see Cora humiliated, but because most of them wanted to witness a happy ending, wanted to see love triumph over judgment, wanted to believe that people could change, could grow, could deserve second chances. When Cora reached the altar, Colt took her hands in his, and she felt the trembling in her own hands still. He squeezed gently, his eyes locked on hers, and mouthed, "You're doing great." Reverend Matthews began the ceremony, his voice carrying through the packed church. The familiar words washed over Cora, dearly beloved, gathered together, holy matrimony. Words she'd never thought would apply to her. Words she'd believed were reserved for women who'd made better choices, lived cleaner lives. But here she was, claiming them anyway, claiming her right to be loved, to be married, to stand before God in community, and pledge herself to a man who'd chosen her with full knowledge of who she was and where she'd been. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, Reverend Matthews said, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. Into this holy union, Colt Avery and Cora Bennett now come to be joined. There was a rustle in the third pew. Mrs. Halstead was standing, her face flushed with righteous indignation. "I object," she said loudly, her voice carrying through the sudden silence. "This is a mockery of the institution of marriage. That woman has no right to stand before this altar in white, pretending to be pure, pretending she hasn't sinned grievously." "Sit down, Delilah," someone said sharply. Cora turned, shocked, to see Mr. Halstead, the bank owner, Mrs. Halstead's usually meek husband, on his feet. "Sit down and be quiet, or leave." "How dare you?" Mrs. Halstead began, but her husband cut her off. "I dare because I'm tired of your judgment, tired of your cruelty dressed up as righteousness, tired of watching you drive good people out of our town because they don't meet your impossible standards." He looked around the church, his face weary but determined. "My wife seems to have forgotten that we all fall short, that we all need grace, that casting stones is a dangerous business for people who live in glass houses." "Are you implying?" Mrs. Halstead's voice was shrill now. "I'm stating facts. You want to talk about sin and shame? Fine. Let's talk about how your first child was born 7 months after our wedding. Let's talk about the money you stole from the church fund 20 years ago that I had to quietly replace. Let's talk about all the ways we're human and flawed and in need of forgiveness." He turned to Cora, and his expression softened. "Miss Bennett, I apologize for my wife's behavior. You have every right to be here, to be married, to be happy. Anyone who says different can answer to me." He sat down, pulling a sputtering Mrs. Halstead with him. The church was utterly silent for a long moment, and then someone started clapping. Mrs. Chen, Cora realized. Then Mrs. Henderson joined in, then the cowboys from the rocking M. Within seconds, half the church was applauding, and Mrs. Halstead's face had gone from red to white. Reverend Matthews cleared his throat, fighting back a smile. "If there are no further objections," he said with pointed emphasis, "we'll continue." The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Cora heard herself making vows to love and honor, to cherish, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer. Heard Colt making the same promises, his voice steady and sure. Felt him slide his grandmother's ring more firmly onto her finger, sealing their commitment. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Matthews said, and Colt cupped her face in his hands and kissed her tenderly, thoroughly, in front of God and everyone, claiming her as his in a way that left no room for doubt. When they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, the applause was thunderous. People were standing, cheering, some wiping away tears. Even Evan was clapping enthusiastically from where he stood beside Mrs. Fletcher in the front pew. They walked back down the aisle together, past the people who'd come to celebrate, and the few who'd come to judge. Mrs. Halstead wouldn't meet Cora's eyes, but her husband nodded respectfully as they passed. At the church doors, the crowd surged forward with congratulations and well wishes, and Cora found herself pulled into hugs by women she barely knew, shaking hands with men who called her Mrs. Avery with genuine respect. The reception was held in the church hall, tables laden with food brought by half the town. There was music and dancing, laughter and conversation. Colt never left Cora's side, his hand always finding hers, his eyes constantly seeking her face as if he couldn't quite believe she was his. "Happy?" he asked during a quiet moment when they stood at the edge of the celebration, watching Evan race around with the other children. "Terrified," Cora admitted. "Happy and terrified in equal measure." "That's fair." Colt pulled her closer. "But you know what? We're going to be fine. Better than fine. We're going to build something lasting here. A home, a family, a life worth living." "I believe you," Cora said, and realized with wonder that she meant it. "I actually believe you." As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, they loaded their few belongings into Colt's wagon and prepared to head to the ranch. Evan was already asleep in the wagon bed, exhausted from excitement and celebration. Mrs. Fletcher hugged Cora fiercely. "You did good, girl. Real good. And if you need anything at all, you send word and I'll be there." "Thank you," Cora whispered, "for everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Just be happy. That's all the thanks I need." Mrs. Fletcher turned to Colt. "You take care of her, you hear? She's been through enough. She deserves peace and joy, and all the good things life has to offer." "Yes, ma'am. That's exactly what I intend to give her." Colt helped Cora up onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her. "Thank you for standing with us today." They drove out of town as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, heading toward the ranch that was now their home. Cora watched Silverside recede behind them, this town that had witnessed her humiliation and her triumph, her fear and her courage. She was leaving behind the boarding house room where she'd spent so many nights worrying about the future. But she was taking with her the friendships forged, the community support earned, the knowledge that she'd faced down her worst fears and survived. The cabin looked warm and welcoming when they arrived, lamplight glowing in the windows. Colt had been out earlier to light the stove and lamps, to make it ready for their arrival. He carried Evan inside and tucked the sleeping boy into his new bed, then returned to find Cora standing in the main room, looking around at their home with wonder. "It's real," she said softly. "This is really our home, our life." "It's real," Colt confirmed. He crossed to her, taking her hands. "And it's just the beginning. We've got years ahead of us to build on this foundation. Years to watch Evan grow up. Years to expand the ranch, maybe add to our family if you want. Years to prove to anyone who doubted us that love and commitment matter more than perfect pasts." Cora thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The pain and shame of her youth, the years of running and hiding, the towns that had rejected her, the man who'd abandoned her and the child he'd denied. All of it had led here, to this cabin, to this man, to this life she'd stopped believing was possible. "I spent so long thinking I didn't deserve happiness," she said. "Thinking my mistakes had disqualified me from the good things in life. But you've taught me something different. You've taught me that everyone deserves second chances, that our past doesn't have to define our future, that courage isn't about never being afraid, it's about being afraid and moving forward anyway." "You've taught me things too," Colt said, "about strength and resilience, about what real courage looks like, about how love doesn't mean finding someone perfect. It means finding someone worth fighting for and choosing them every single day." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to me." "I could never regret it," Cora said, and knew it was true. "You saved me, Colt. You and this town, this community that decided to see past my mistakes. You saved me from a life of running and hiding. You gave me back my dignity." "No," Colt said firmly. "You saved yourself. You did the hard work of surviving, of raising Evan, of never giving up even when things seemed hopeless. All I did was see what was already there and have the good sense to hold on tight." They stood together in their new home, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the sounds of their son sleeping peacefully in the next room. Outside, the Montana night spread vast and full of stars, the same stars that had witnessed Cora's journey from shame to redemption, from isolation to belonging. The years that followed proved Colt's promises true. The ranch grew and prospered. Evan thrived, growing from a cautious 4-year-old into a confident boy who could rope and ride and help his father with the horses. 2 years after the wedding, Cora gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, and 3 years after that, a son they called James. The cabin was expanded to accommodate their growing family, rooms added with the same care and craftsmanship Colt had shown in building the original structure. Silverside changed too. Mrs. Halstead grew quieter after her husband's public rebellion, her influence waning as the town evolved. New families moved in, drawn by the railroad that finally came through. The community grew more tolerant, more diverse, more willing to judge people by their character rather than their circumstances. Cora became known not as the fallen woman who'd been redeemed, but simply as Mrs. Avery, Colt's capable wife, the mother who raised good children, the neighbor who showed up when someone needed help. She worked alongside her husband building their ranch into one of the most successful operations in the valley. She taught her children to read and be kind and stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. She became, over time, exactly what Colt had always seen in her, a woman of strength and dignity and quiet courage. Evan grew into a fine young man who worked the ranch beside his father and never once doubted that Colt was his papa in every way that mattered. When he was 16, Colt legally adopted him, and Evan took the Avery name with pride. He never knew his biological father's identity. Cora decided that Robert Cunningham had forfeited any right to claim her son, and he never asked. The man who'd taught him to skip stones and tie knots and be honest and hardworking was the only father he needed or wanted. 10 years after the wedding, Cora stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching the sun set over the valley. Sarah and James were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Evan was in the barn helping Colt with the horses. The land around them was dotted with cattle and horses, fences and outbuildings, the physical evidence of years of hard work and shared dreams. Mrs. Fletcher had passed the previous winter, peacefully in her sleep at 78. She'd lived long enough to see Cora happy and settled, to hold baby Sarah and James, to know that her kindness had borne lasting fruit. At her funeral, half the town had turned out, and Cora had stood beside the grave remembering the woman who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd taught her that accepting help wasn't weakness, and that found family could be just as strong as blood ties. Thinking about Mrs. Fletcher, Colt's voice came from behind her, and Cora turned to find her husband watching her with those same warm eyes that had seen past her shame all those years ago. "How did you know?" "You get this look when you're remembering her, sad and grateful at the same time." He joined her at the porch railing, his shoulder touching hers. "She'd be proud of you, of us, of everything we've built." "I hope so." Cora leaned into his solid warmth. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life, that I get to have all this, you, our children, this home. After everything that happened, after all the years of running and hiding, I never thought I'd find this kind of peace." "You deserved it all along," Colt said. "You just needed someone to remind you of that." "You did more than remind me. You showed me. Every single day, you've shown me that I'm worth loving, worth fighting for, worth standing beside." She turned to face him fully. "I was so scared that day you first talked to me at the festival. Scared of hoping, scared of trusting, scared of believing in possibilities. But you were patient with my fear. You waited for me to catch up to what you already knew. That we belonged together," Colt finished. "That our past didn't matter as much as our future. That love and commitment could overcome anything." He pulled her close, the gesture as natural now as breathing after 10 years of marriage. "Best decision I ever made asking you to marry me. Best day of my life when you said yes." "Mine too," Cora said. Even with Mrs. Halstead's dramatic objection, they both laughed, remembering. Mrs. Halstead had eventually mellowed, her sharp edges worn down by time and her husband's gentle insistence on kindness. She'd never apologized to Cora directly, but she'd stopped spreading gossip and had even brought a basket of apples from her tree when James was born. It wasn't friendship, but it was peace, And Cora had learned that sometimes that was enough. "Mama! Papa!" Sarah came running up the porch steps, her braids flying behind her. "James said I can't learn to rope because I'm a girl, but that's not true, is it? Tell him that's not true." Colt scooped his daughter up with one arm. "Your brother's got some learning to do. Come on, let's go show him what Avery women are made of. Your mama can outrope half the hands in this valley when she sets her mind to it." He carried Sarah toward the barn, calling for James to come watch, and Cora stayed on the porch for a moment longer, savoring the scene. Her family, her home, her life, earned through struggle and pain and the courage to keep trying even when everything seemed hopeless. She thought about the girl she'd been at 17, so desperate to be loved that she'd risked everything. About the woman she'd become in the years of running, hardened by judgment but refusing to be broken. About the moment in that church social when Colt had stood up and declared her worth defending. About the wedding where she'd claimed her right to happiness in front of everyone who'd ever doubted her. All of it, every painful moment, every humiliation, every fear, had led her here, had shaped her into a woman strong enough to accept love when it was offered, brave enough to build a life without apology, wise enough to know that her worth had never been determined by other people's opinions. Evan emerged from the barn, tall and strong at 14, and saw her standing alone on the porch. "You all right, Ma?" he called. "I'm perfect, sweetheart. Just enjoying the evening." He grinned and disappeared back inside, and Cora smiled. He never called her Ma anymore except in moments of affection, preferring the more grown-up mom. But she treasured those glimpses of the little boy he'd been, the child who'd clung to her through years of uncertainty and had blossomed into this confident young man under Colt's guidance. The sun touched the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere in the barn, her family was laughing together, teaching Sarah the skills that would let her hold her own in this frontier territory. In the house behind her, the table was set for dinner. The beds were made. The home they'd built together waited warm and welcoming. Cora Bennett Avery stood on her porch and felt gratitude wash over her so powerfully it brought tears to her eyes. Not the bitter tears of shame she'd shed so many times before, but tears of joy and wonder at how far she'd come, at the life she'd built from the ashes of her mistakes, at the love that had saved her not by erasing her past, but by showing her that her past didn't have to define her future. She was no longer the woman who'd stayed in the shadows, terrified of judgment. She was no longer the girl who'd believed she deserved nothing but shame and exile. She was Cora Avery, beloved wife, devoted mother, partner in building a legacy that would outlast them both. She was the woman who'd faced down a town's cruelty and claimed her place anyway, who'd chosen courage over fear, who'd believed finally that she was worth the fight. And as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed her transformation from outcast to beloved, Cora whispered a prayer of thanks to whatever force in the universe had guided her to Silverside, to Colt, to this life she'd stopped daring to dream of. She'd thought no one would marry her with a child, thought she'd spend her life running from judgment and shame. But a cowboy with honest eyes and a patient heart had asked her in front of them all, had claimed her publicly and proudly, and had shown her that second chances weren't just possible, they were precious. And in doing so, he'd given her the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that she'd always deserved to be loved, exactly as she was. The evening breeze carried the sound of her family's laughter from the barn, and Cora smiled through her tears. She'd survived the shame, she'd endured the judgment, she'd fought for her son and herself with every ounce of courage she possessed. And in the end, love had won. Not the false promises of her youth, but real love, steady and true and strong enough to weather any storm. The kind of love that saw past mistakes to the person beneath. The kind of love that chose commitment over convenience. The kind of love that built homes and raised children and created legacies that would echo through generations. The woman who'd stayed in the shadows now stood in the light, surrounded by everything she'd fought for and more than she'd ever dared to hope for. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.